They say that silence in a home is a sign of peace, but sometimes it is merely the lull before an entire universe collapses. We are used to thinking that evil wears a hideous mask, that monsters hide in dark alleys, not in the bedroom next door, tucked under a soft pink blanket. A woman's nature. It is a complex mechanism. We believe that a woman is created to build, to guard the hearth, to be the gold standard of virtue. But what happens when that virtue becomes a cage? When every breath you take, every step you make, and even your smile is a meticulously crafted lie, years in the making. In the quiet suburb of Markham, where the manicured lawns look as if they've been measured with a ruler, lived the Pan family, model immigrants, hard-working, successful, and their pride, Jennifer, a quiet, gifted pianist. The golden daughter whose path was paved all the way to the horizon. At first glance, it was a tragedy, a home invasion gone wrong. No, when detectives stepped inside that house, they smelled more than just gunpowder. They felt the chill of a lie so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jennifer Pan, a girl who created the perfect illusion of a life. But to keep that illusion alive, she had to spill the blood of the ones who gave her life. How does a small lie about school grades turn into a death warrant? And what is the price of freedom if it costs 2 shots at point-blank range? Today, we look into the abyss of the golden daughter and see what truly hides behind the mask of obedience. Your likes and comments help promote our videos, and please subscribe to Crime Queen if you appreciate high-quality true crime videos. Thank you. To understand how a monster is born, we must go back to the very beginning, to the point where love transforms into tyranny and care into a suffocating grip. Jennifer Pan's story didn't begin on that fatal night. It began decades earlier in the minds of 2 people who dreamed of a better life, Bich Ha and Hui Han Pan. They were refugees from Vietnam, people who knew the price of survival. Arriving in Canada in 1979, they didn't look for easy paths. They worked 12 to 14 hours a day at an auto parts factory, saving every cent to build their own castle, and they built it. By 2004, they owned a spacious home, around 2,500 square feet, in a prestigious area of Markham, with 2 new cars in the garage and a solid bank account. But their main project was Jennifer. To Han and Bitch, their daughter wasn't just a child. She was an investment. She was living proof that their sacrifices weren't in vain. And the demands were high. No parties, no hanging out with friends, no dating, God forbid. Little Jennifer's life resembled the schedule of an elite special forces soldier. Wake up at 5 in the morning, music lessons. She started playing piano at age 4, school, figure skating. She spent 20 to 25 hours a week at the rink. Often she would return home when the temperature outside dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, exhausted, with her legs trembling from cold and fatigue. But she wasn't met with warm hugs. She was met with sheet music and textbooks. She had to be the best. She had to be an Olympic champion, a doctor, the pride of the nation. Han Pan, her father, was a man of discipline. In his world, only 2 types of grades existed: A and failure. Anything below 90% was considered a personal insult to the family. Jennifer would later say, "My father was like an emperor. His word was law." And it was here, in this sterile, perfect atmosphere, that the first crack began to grow. In the 8th grade, Jennifer failed to get an A in math for the first time. It seems like a small thing, right? No. For her, it was the end of the world. She saw the way her father looked at her report card, a cold, disappointed stare. That day, she realized, her parents' love was not a gift. It was a salary, one that had to be earned with perfect results. So Jennifer made a choice. She didn't try harder. She became better at lying. She bought whiteout, glue, and began creating her own parallel reality. She forged report cards for all 4 years of high school. She was a master of calligraphy, carefully changing a C to an A. She felt not shame, but relief. It was her tiny rebellion. She created the mask of the golden girl for her parents, while inside, a void was growing. Jennifer told everyone at school she was a successful figure skater, even though a knee injury had ended her career long ago. She lied about her grades to her friends. She lied to her teachers. Her entire world became an intricate web where one thread held up another. The climax came in her senior year. Jennifer didn't graduate. She failed her math exam. Getting into the university her father dreamed of became impossible. But how do you admit that to a man who had already bought you a new Lexus as a gift for your future enrollment? Jennifer took a deep breath and took the next step into the abyss. She told her parents she had been accepted into the University of Toronto's pharmacy program. She even claimed she received a scholarship. Every day for 2 years, she said goodbye to her parents, grabbed her book bag, and drove. She drove 30 miles to the city center, walked into a public library, and sat there for hours. She pretended to take notes, buying biology and pharmacology textbooks just so they would sit on her desk at home. She fabricated tuition bills that her father obediently paid. It was a grand production with a single actor. But this production had a dark side. Daniel Wong, a guy she began dating in secret. A small-time drug dealer, a bad boy who became her breath of air in the suffocating chamber of parental control. It was Daniel who would become the catalyst, the one who would turn a quiet liar into a cold-blooded killer. Jennifer Pan lived 2 lives. In one, she was a diligent student, a future pharmacist, the pride of Han and Bitch. In the other, she was a criminal's girlfriend who hated every word that came out of her father's mouth. And these 2 worlds were bound to collide. Love. It is either a salvation or the shortest route to insanity. For Jennifer Pan, love wore the face of Daniel Wong. He was the complete opposite of her sterile, controlled world. Daniel was a small-time marijuana dealer. He wore baggy clothes and didn't demand diplomas or excellence. With him, she could just be Jennifer. But to her father, Han Pan, this union wasn't just undesirable. It was impossible. Daniel was dirt on the flawless family portrait. For 2 years, Jennifer managed to hold this structure of lies together. In the morning, she was studying at the university, but in reality, she was spending her time at Daniel's apartment just a few miles from home. In the evening, she would return and recount chemistry lectures she had researched on the internet to her father. But a lie of this magnitude, it's like radiation. It's invisible, but it slowly kills everything it touches. In 2009, the House of Cards collapsed. Han began to suspect something was wrong. Jennifer told him she was volunteering at a hospital over 30 miles away from Markham. Her father decided to give her a ride. He dropped her off at the entrance and he waited. He watched as his daughter walked into the building only to see her walk out of a side door 10 minutes later, trying to slip away unnoticed. It was the moment of truth. That evening, the Pan house was quiet. Terrifyingly quiet. Han and Bitch conducted an interrogation, and Jennifer, she broke. She confessed to everything. The fact that she never graduated high school. The fact that she had never stepped foot in a university. The fact that every dollar they gave her for tuition had gone toward her secret life with Daniel. Han's reaction was glacial. He didn't scream. Instead, he took her life away without ever leaving the house. Jennifer was 24 years old, but she was locked away like a 10-year-old child. They took her cell phone. They banned her from using the computer. She was forbidden from leaving the house without an escort. Her only route was to the music school where she taught, and her father drove her personally, tracking the time by the odometer. Han Pan issued an ultimatum. Either you stay here and go back to school, or you go to your dealer and never cross this threshold again. Jennifer made her choice. She chose to stay, but not out of love. Inside her head, a plan began to germinate. She felt like a bird in a gilded cage where the bars were tightening every single day. She hated her father for his control. She hated her mother for her silent compliance. But most of all, she feared losing the comfort and the inheritance that awaited her. $500,000. That was the price of freedom in her mind. If her parents simply disappeared, the cage would open. And the key to that cage was, once again, Daniel Wong. By the spring of 2010, Jennifer was no longer a frightened girl. She had become a strategist. She began communicating with Daniel through an old cell phone she hid under her mattress. Their correspondence, it is a chronicle of cold-bloodedness. They didn't discuss feelings. They discussed a service. Daniel put her in touch with a man nicknamed Homeboy, Lenford Crawford. The price? $10,000 for 2 lives. Jennifer slowly, methodically prepared the ground. She played the role of the reformed daughter. She started smiling at her father again. She baked pies for her mother. She was creating the alibi of the caring Jennifer, while a down payment for hitmen sat in her purse. She wasn't in a state of passion. This wasn't an impulsive cry for help. It was the cold calculation of a black widow who decided her parents were simply trash. Obstacles in the way of her new, happy life with Daniel. She even created a schedule. She knew exactly what time her father went to bed. She knew that her mother liked to watch TV in the living room in the evenings. She thought of every detail, except one. She didn't realize that blood is much harder to wash away than a failing grade on a report card. November 8th was approaching. Jennifer Pan was waiting for the dark. She was waiting for her new life to begin with 3 gunshots and 1 phone call to emergency services. Jennifer acted as she always did. No trembling hands, no shadow of a doubt. She had dinner with her parents. She watched as her mother, Bitch Ha, settled in the living room to watch her favorite TV show. She heard her father, Han, head to the upstairs bedroom. He always went to bed early so he could be up for work, providing that bright future for his daughter. 10:00 p.m. Jennifer walks downstairs. She passes her mother. Bitch smiles at her. She has no idea that her daughter has just committed her final betrayal. Jennifer approaches the front door and quietly clicks the lock. She leaves the door unbolted. It is an invitation for death. She returns to her room and sends the signal, a short message to Daniel. The machinery of murder is now in motion. A few minutes later, 3 men enter the house: David Milvaganam, Lenford Crawford, and Eric Carty. They don't break in. They walk in like guests. One of them is holding a .45 caliber handgun. Act 1. The performance begins. One of the intruders heads to the second floor. Han Pan wakes up to a pistol barrel shoved into his face. He, the head of the household, a proud man, is dragged out of bed. He is led downstairs to the living room where Bish is already sitting. She is terrified. She doesn't understand what is happening. "Where is the money? Where is the safe?" they scream. This is part of the plan. A routine robbery. No one is supposed to suspect that the target isn't cash, it's lives. Jennifer at this moment is on the second floor. She is playing the role of the victim. They tie her up. But how? With a loose knot. One of her hands can still reach her phone. She listens as her parents are led down into the basement. Imagine this scene. The basement of the Pan home. Cold concrete floor. The smell of dampness and old storage. Han and Bish are on their knees. They are still hoping. They think if they give up the money, these men will leave. Beach is crying, pleading, "Please don't hurt my daughter. Take everything. Just leave her alive." She didn't know that her daughter was the head scriptwriter for this night. Act 2. The shots. The silence of the house is sliced open by a sound, sharp, sudden, the first shot. The bullet hits Bitch in the back of the head. She dies instantly, never even realizing she had been betrayed. The second bullet is for Han. It tears through his shoulder and enters his face, shattering his jaw. He collapses to the floor, soaking the concrete in blood. The killers didn't stop to check for a pulse. They thought the job was done. 2 targets, 2 corpses. Jennifer, screaming into the phone, "Help! Please, help! Someone broke into my house! I heard shots! My hands are tied! I'm tied to the banister on the 2nd floor! Please, hurry!" Dispatcher, "Ma'am, stay calm. Where are your parents?" Jennifer, "I don't know. I heard my dad screaming. Please, I'm scared. They're still here." It was a brilliant piece of acting. Her voice carried a primal terror. She sobbed, she gasped, she begged. If you listened to that recording, you wouldn't doubt her for a second. This girl is a wretched victim living through her worst nightmare. But while she was screaming into the phone, something happened that was not in her script. In the basement, amidst the silence and the smell of cordite, Han Pan opened his eyes. The bullet hadn't killed him. It passed through, leaving him alive, though in critical condition. Covered in blood, blinded by pain, he finds the strength to stand. He literally crawls out of the house, leaving a trail of blood every foot of the way. At that moment, her heart must have dropped into her stomach, but she keeps playing. She tells the dispatcher, "Oh my God, I see my dad. He's outside. He's hurt. Dad, Dad." Minutes later, the street is filled with the wail of sirens and the blue flash of police lights. Paramedics rush into the house. They find Jennifer tied to the banister. An officer would later note, the knot was strange. Too loose for professional robbers. But at the time, it seemed like a minor detail. They find Bitch Hapan in the basement, dead. She lay in a pool of her own blood, still in her house clothes. Han Pan is loaded into the ambulance. He's in a coma. His chances of survival are slim. Jennifer watches him go with a look of despair. The doctors fight for his life, unaware that the one person who wants Han to never wake up is standing right there, in handcuffs, made of lies. Jennifer is taken to the station. She is the only witness. She is the key to catching the robbers. She sits in the chair across from the detective, her face swollen from tears. But here, in the sterile interrogation room, her perfect web will begin to tear, because the lies you build for years might withstand the pressure of parents, but they rarely survive the cold logic of a professional investigator. In the first hours following the tragedy, she was the embodiment of heartbreak. At the police station, she sat huddled in a ball, hugging herself, as if trying to hold the pieces of her shattered life together. She cried so convincingly that even seasoned officers felt their hearts ache for her. Poor girl, an orphan, while her father still balanced on the razor's edge between the living and the dead. But detectives have a professional quirk. They don't believe in coincidences. And in Jennifer's case, there were far too many of them. Try to visualize that. Your hands are tied behind your back or lashed to a railing. You are squirming, trying to pull out a phone, unlock it, and dial 3 digits, all while your parents are being murdered downstairs. Detectives later conducted a reenactment. It was practically impossible. Yet Jennifer stuck to her story. Then, there was the front door. In quiet Markham, people don't leave their doors unlocked on a freezing November night. Han Pan was a paranoid man when it came to security. He checked the locks 3 times before bed. And yet, that night, the door wasn't just unlocked. It was wide open, as if the house were inviting death inside. But the strangest part was the behavior of the robbers. They entered the home for profit. But what did they take? A few $100s. They left expensive watches, electronics, and Bitchha's jewelry completely untouched. And most inexplicably, they left a witness. Professional killers, and the shots to the head in the basement suggested either professionalism or extreme brutality. Don't leave someone alive who can identify them. Why spare Jennifer? Why didn't they put a bullet in this fragile girl who had seen their faces? "I just got lucky," she whispered during the interrogation, wiping away her tears. But Detective Guts felt it. Jennifer wasn't radiating grief. She was radiating calculation. While Jennifer played the role of the victim, the police began to dig. They looked beneath the polished surface of her perfect life, and what they found there shocked them. They contacted the University of Toronto. Jennifer Pan? No, we have no record of a student by that name. They contacted the hospital where she supposedly volunteered. We don't know who that is. 2 years. 2 years of total fiction. The detectives realized they weren't dealing with a golden girl. They were dealing with a pathological liar who had constructed an entire universe out of deception. And if she could lie to her father's face every single night for 2 years, what else was she capable of? Surveillance on Jennifer in the days after her mother's funeral bore new fruit. She didn't look like a woman crushed by loss. She was frequently on her phone, and her calls led to one person, Daniel Wong. But the biggest blow to Jennifer didn't come from the police. Her perfect plan began to crumble where she least expected it, in the intensive care unit. Han Pan, the man she had sentenced to death, refused to die. 3 days after the shooting, he emerged from his coma. He couldn't speak, his jaw had been shattered by the bullet, but his eyes, they were filled with terror. When a detective approached his bed and asked, "Han, do you remember what happened?" The old man slowly nodded. They gave him a pen and paper. His hand shook, but he scrawled the letters that would mark the beginning of the end for his daughter. He hadn't seen the hitmen. He had seen something worse. He remembered that on the night he was being led down the stairs, he caught a glimpse of Jennifer. She wasn't terrified. She wasn't struggling. She was standing there, talking to one of the killers, calmly, like they were old friends. Han Pan realized the most horrific truth a father can ever face. The bullet in his face had been paid for by his own child. The detectives decided to go on the offensive. They invited Jennifer for a third interview. They offered her coffee, they were polite, until an officer walked in with the results of her phone records. "Jennifer," the detective said softly, "your dad woke up, and he told us something very interesting." At that moment, the mask of the golden daughter cracked for the first time. Jennifer's face didn't twist with joy that her father was alive. Number. For a split second, it reflected pure, icy anger. She realized the hunt was on, and this time, she wasn't the hunter. But sitting across from her is Detective Jim Goetz. He isn't just a police officer. He is a master of the psychological game. He has studied every word, every breath she took in her previous interviews. And he knows Jennifer lies as naturally as she breathes. Goetz starts slowly. He talks about her father, about the fact that Han Pan has regained consciousness and started giving statements. He watches Jennifer's pupils. There is no relief there. There is only calculation. The detective lays his first card on the table, the cell tower records. "Jennifer," his voice is almost fatherly. "We checked your phone. We know that on the night of the murder, you weren't just a victim. We know about your messages to Daniel. We know about Homeboy." Jennifer remains silent. Her face is a porcelain mask. "We know you weren't attending university, Jennifer. We know you forged every single document for the last 4 years." The silence in the room becomes unbearable. The detective pauses, a long, heavy pause. He waits for the silence to press down on her harder than any accusation could, and Jennifer breaks, but not like a normal person. She doesn't fall to her knees screaming, "Forgive me." No, she does what she does best. She invents a new, even more elaborate lie. "Okay," she whispers, wiping dry eyes. "I'll tell you the truth, but it's not what you think." She spins a new story. She claims she was suffering so much under her parents' oppression that she wanted to end her own life. She says she hired these men to kill her. It was suicide by hitman. "I paid them $10,000 to shoot me," she sobs. "But they messed up. They came into the house and attacked my parents instead of me. It was a mistake." A horrible, bloody mistake. Detective Goetz can barely suppress a smirk. This version didn't hold up to even the slightest scrutiny. If the hitmen messed up, why didn't they kill her when they saw her? Why did they lead Han and Bitch to the basement if their target was a girl on the second floor? And most importantly, why were the robbers chatting with her like friends before pulling the trigger? While Jennifer wove her new web, the tech department cracked open her real world. Detectives gained access to the deleted messages from her secret phone. Daniel Wong and Jennifer had discussed the murder in painstaking detail. "My mom is home. Dad will be in bed soon. The door will be open." This wasn't a suicide plan. This was an execution manual. Detectives tracked the movements of the hitmen's phones, David Milvaganam and Lenford Crawford. On the night of the murder, their cell signals pinged off towers, moving closer to the Pan home exactly when Jennifer gave them the green light. They had found the business plan for the crime. Jennifer had hoped to collect her share of the inheritance, around $250,000 immediately, and a house worth $500,000. She wanted to buy her freedom with her mother's blood. Detective Goetz leans forward, his face inches from hers. "Jennifer, your father told us that you were standing right next to the killer. You watched as he led him downstairs. You didn't cry. You didn't try to help. You just waited for it to be over." In that moment, the mask finally crumbled. Jennifer's eyes turned cold, cold as the ice in the bay in January. She realized the game was over. There was no more golden daughter, no more victim. There was only a young woman who had cold-bloodedly organized the execution of her parents for a guy who didn't even love her and money she didn't deserve. "I want a lawyer," she said curtly. On November 22nd, Jennifer Pan was officially arrested. Later, the others were hunted down: Daniel Wong, her great love, and the 3 hired guns. All of Markham shuddered. Neighbors who had watched Jennifer walk to school with her violin case for years couldn't believe it. How could this fragile, polite girl turn into a monster? But the answer was both simple and terrifying. She didn't turn into one. She had always been one. It's just that before, she only killed the truth. Now, she had moved on to people. The investigation was long. Thousands of pages of transcripts, hundreds of hours of surveillance footage. The police reconstructed every step of this spider piece by piece. And the more they learned, the clearer it became. Jennifer Pan was the most dangerous person in that house because the hitmen acted for money, but she acted out of a hatred masked by a fake smile. In the courtroom, Jennifer looked disappointingly ordinary. She didn't wear a prison jumpsuit. She wore neat cardigans and blouses, her hair pulled back. She was still trying to look like that golden girl. But her eyes gave her away. They were cold, hollow. There wasn't a hint of remorse, not a single tear for the mother whose autopsy photos the court was examining at that very moment. The most agonizing part of the trial was the testimony of Han Pan. He entered the courtroom leaning on a cane, having aged 10 years in a single night. He didn't look at his daughter. His voice, distorted by the trauma to his jaw, trembled as he described the final minutes of his wife's life. "When I lost my wife, I lost my daughter at the same time." Han's words hung in the courtroom in dead silence. "I no longer feel I have a family. I have only an empty space." Jennifer's defense clung to the botched suicide version until the bitter end, but prosecutors presented more than 200 pieces of evidence. The most devastating was a series of text messages. In one, sent days before the murder, Jennifer wrote to Daniel, "My dad has to go first. Mom follows. Everything has to look clean." On December 13th, 2014, the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty, on all counts, first-degree murder and attempted murder. The judge showed no mercy. In a justice system that demanded the highest price for such betrayal, the sentence sounded like a funeral knell. Life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole for 25 years for the murder of Bitch Ha Pan. A second life sentence, to be served concurrently, for the attempted murder of her father. Daniel Wong and the other accomplices received similar sentences. When the verdict was read, Jennifer didn't scream. She didn't faint. She simply tilted her head slightly, as if she were already calculating what new lie she could weave to escape this reality. But this time, the walls were real, and no amount of whiteout or forged diplomas could fix what she had done. The cage she had dreamed of escaping had finally slammed shut for good. This time, it was forever. Han Pan survived, but it was a hollow victory. The man who spent his whole life building an empire for his daughter was left alone on the ruins of his dreams. He sold the house. He cannot work. His body and his soul are too badly scarred. He has a permanent restraining order in place, forbidding Jennifer from ever contacting him. To him, his daughter died that night she opened the door for those killers. Jennifer Pan is currently in a women's prison in Kitchener. She spends her days behind bars, in a world where she no longer has to pretend to be a student or a pianist. There, she is just a number, an inmate who realized far too late that freedom bought with blood smells only of gunpowder and isolation. This story isn't just a chronicle of a murder. It is a warning about the danger of building a relationship on a foundation of expectations and fear, about how a perfect facade often hides the deepest cracks. We all wear masks. We smile at our colleagues. We appear to be devoted children and loyal friends. But sometimes, behind the gentlest smile and the most obedient gaze lies an abyss. Jennifer Pan wanted to be free. She wanted Daniel's love. She wanted to escape the control. But in the end, she built herself a cage from which there is no escape. Look a little closer at the ones standing next to you. Silence in a home isn't always peace. Sometimes, it's just the sound of someone very quietly unlocking the front door. My name is Crime Queen. And remember, the most terrifying monsters are the ones who call us family. Take care of yourselves, and don't trust the silence. Like this story if you found it interesting, and subscribe to the channel. I look forward to reading your thoughts on this case in the comments below. They say girlhood friendship is the most fragile yet powerful bond in the world. It's blood oaths, shared secrets, and endless messages until dawn. We're used to believing that female aggression is just backstabbing whispers or poisonous comments on social media. But what happens when that sacred connection mutates? When behind those glossy Instagram filters hides not teenage insecurity, but ice-cold, calculated sociopathy? Morgantown, West Virginia. A July night in 2012. A quiet suburb where the scariest thing that could happen was a bad grade. 16-year-old Skylar Neese leaves her bedroom window open. She believes that on the other side her two best friends are waiting, Sheila and Rachel, the ones she shared every joy and heartbreak with. She jumps into their car, never suspecting that in 40 minutes, her life will end in the woods miles from home, to the sound of her own screams. This isn't a story about jealousy over a boy. It's not about money or revenge. This case shook seasoned detectives with its terrifying, almost absurd simplicity. When, after months of lies, fake tears, and Twitter posts, the truth was finally dragged into the light. The world heard a phrase that would become the epitaph of this friendship. "We just didn't like her anymore," one of the killers would say. "We just didn't want to be friends with her." 3 friends, 2 killers, 1 knife, and the silence that fell that night in the West Virginia woods. A silence we are breaking today to understand. How do ordinary girls turn into predators hiding behind the mask of best friends? To understand how something so monstrous took root in the quiet waters of Morgantown, we have to go back to the years before their social media feeds were poisoned, back when forever felt like an unbreakable promise. Your likes and comments help promote our videos. And please subscribe to Crime Queen if you appreciate high-quality true crime videos. Thank you. West Virginia is a land of dense forests and people who value their silence. Morgantown is no exception. In the early 2000s, it was a town where life revolved around the high school, the local diner, and Sunday service. It was here, in a cozy apartment on Cassville Pike, that Skylar Neese grew up. For her parents, Dave and Mary, Skylar was everything. An only child, prayed for and infinitely loved. She grew up in an atmosphere of absolute trust. Look at her childhood photos, a wide, honest smile, and a gaze without a hint of pretense. By 16, she weighed about 120 pounds, a petite, energetic girl who wasn't afraid of hard work. While her peers were spending their parents' money on makeup, Skylar was flipping burgers at the local Wendy's. She valued every dollar she earned and dreamed of becoming a lawyer to protect those who couldn't stand up for themselves. But there was one constant in her life that would later become her curse: Sheila Eddy. They met when they were 8 years old. Sheila was vibrant. She had that inexplicable spark that draws people in, a charisma mixed with a slight edge of defiance. In the Neese household, Sheila was adored. She was the second daughter. She knew where the spoons were kept in the kitchen. She slept in the twin bed next to Skylar during endless sleepovers, and she was a part of every family holiday. Dave Neese would later say, "If you had asked me then, I would have given my life for Sheila without a second thought." But Sheila had another side. She grew up in a single-parent home after her parents' divorce, and her mother, Tara, seemed to try to compensate for the father's absence with excessive freedom. In the Eddy house, there were no strict rules. Anything went. Sheila learned early on how to wear masks. To adults, she was the sweet girl next door, but behind the closed doors of her bedroom, she was beginning to taste the power she held over those around her. In high school at University High, a third girl joined their tight duo, Rachel Schoaf. Rachel was the total opposite of Sheila. She grew up in a deeply religious, conservative family. Theater, church choir, a flawless reputation. She was the good girl who desperately wanted to be cool. And Sheila Eddy became her gateway into the world of bad girls. Rachel gravitated towards Sheila, copying her style, her laugh, and her cynicism. Thus, the trio was formed. The three Graces of Morgantown. They were inseparable. If you opened Twitter in 2011, you saw their endless digital footprint, hundreds of photos, the girls hugging in front of school lockers, the girls eating pizza, the girls swearing love until the end of time. But the laws of psychology are harsh. A trio is rarely stable. There are always two who are closer, and one who becomes extra. By the spring of 2012, the temperature in their relationship began to drop, even as the West Virginia heat climbed above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Skylar began to notice Sheila and Rachel whispering whenever she entered the room. She saw them creating group chats she wasn't invited to. Why was this happening? Skylar was too good. She was a moral compass that began to irritate Sheila. Sheila wanted to experiment with alcohol, with shoplifting, with relationships, and Skylar knew their secrets. There is a version of events, later confirmed by witnesses, that Skylar had witnessed an intimate encounter between Sheila and Rachel. In a small town where Rachel sang in the church choir, such a secret was a death sentence for a reputation. Sheila Eddy, whose character was already showing traits of a classic narcissist, could not forgive her friend for holding her by the throat with that knowledge. "She's going to tell on us," Sheila would whisper to Rachel during their secret car rides outside of town. "Skylar is a rat. She pretends to be a saint, but she'll destroy us both." Look at their Twitter feeds from that period. It is a true chronicle of the disintegration of a human soul. Skylar writes, "It's amazing how fast people forget everything good you've ever done for them." Sheila replies, never mentioning a name, but everyone knows who it's for. "Some people just need to learn to keep their mouths shut before they get shut for them." It was a slow burn, a heavy, dragging buildup of dread. Sheila began the psychological grooming of Rachel. She isolated her from other friends, convincing her that only the two of them understood the true nature of things. Rachel, follower-prone and addicted to the approval of the cool friend, gradually lost touch with reality. To them, killing Skylar wasn't a crime, it was a project, a way to purge their world of an inconvenient witness. In June 2012, as the summer in Morgantown hit its peak, the plan was finalized. They didn't just want to fight with Skylar. They discussed how to strike so she wouldn't have time to scream. They discussed whether the hole in the woods of Pennsylvania, 30 miles from their school, would be deep enough. Skylar still believed it was just a rough patch. She loved them. She missed the times when the three of them watched movies and dreamed of graduation. She had no idea that her sisters had already bought shovels and hidden them in the trunk of Sheila's black Toyota. A 16-year-old girl, an honor student, her parents' pride. She walked toward her death with an open heart, believing that friendship was forever. She didn't realize that for Sheila Eddy, forever was only the length of time she wanted Skylar to stay silent. Breaking any bond is painful. But when that bond shatters in the airtight, hermetic world of three teenage girls, the pain turns into a toxic sediment that begins to corrode everything around it. By mid-2012, the friendship between Skylar, Sheila, and Rachel had transformed into a field of psychological warfare. To understand why Sheila Eddy decided her best friend had to die, we have to look inside her head. Sheila wasn't just a mean girl from a high school movie. She was a classic manipulator. To her, people were tools, and Skylar niece, who had known Sheila for too long and too well, had stopped being a useful tool. She had become an inconvenient witness. In June, Morgantown was melting. Temperatures often climbed over 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and in that stifling heat, Skylar's frustration grew. She saw her place beside Sheila being taken by Rachel, a girl who, only a year ago, was just an attachment to their duo. But there was one specific incident, the black swan, that flipped the switch. One evening, during yet another sleepover, Skylar reportedly witnessed an intimate sexual encounter between Sheila and Rachel. In the context of modern America, this might seem like a triviality, but not in Morgantown. Not for Rachel Schoaf, whose family was a pillar of Christian morality, and certainly not for Sheila Eddy, whose entire status was built on the image of the perfect popular girl. Sheila realized that Skylar now held power over her. One word, and Sheila's reputation would be scorched. One word, and Rachel would be cast out of her family. Skylar didn't intend to blackmail them. She was simply hurt and disillusioned. She began to post on Twitter, never naming names, but with terrifying bluntness. She wrote, "I really did everything for you, and you just wiped your feet on me." And later, "I have secrets that could destroy your lives, but I'm not like you." To Sheila Eddy, this was a declaration of war. She didn't see these words as a cry for help. She saw them as a direct threat. That was when, in late June, the idea was born. Not to end the friendship, not to move to another town, but to delete the source of the threat. "We have to get rid of her," Sheila told Rachel during one of their drives along the back roads. Imagine the scene. Two girls, music on the radio, wind blowing through open windows, and Sheila's voice, casual, almost bored, suggesting a murder. Rachel initially took it as a joke, but Sheila wasn't joking. She began to methodically, day after day, program Rachel. "She's going to tell, Rachel. Your parents will find out. They'll lock you up. They'll hate you. The only way we can be free is if Skylar disappears." It was the masterwork of a psychopath. Sheila created a false dilemma for Rachel. Either Skylar dies, or Rachel's own life is destroyed. There was no other choice. They began to plan. This wasn't an impulsive decision. They discussed it during classes. They messaged in private chats. 1, 2, 3, Sheila suggested. That will be our signal. When I say 3, we attack. They prepared a death kit. In the trunk of Sheila's Toyota, alongside beach towels and textbooks, now sat 2 shovels bought at a hardware store on the edge of town. There were also bottles of bleach and a change of clothes. Sheila even thought about which knives to take, the sharpest ones from her mother's kitchen set. The motive, we just didn't like her anymore, is Sheila Eddy's greatest lie. In reality, it was fear. A fear of exposure mixed with absolute ice-cold sociopathy. Sheila didn't feel guilt, she only felt a logical necessity. Skylar had become a bug in her perfect system, and bugs are meant to be erased. On July 6th, Skylar posted her final tweet, "Sick of this fakeness, just want everything to be honest." She didn't know that honesty would come for her in the form of 2 kitchen knives. That evening, Sheila called her. Her voice was soft and inviting. "Skylar, enough fighting. We're acting like kids. Let's just go to our spot, smoke, look at the stars and talk it all out. Please, we miss you." Skylar wanted to believe her. The heart of this girl, who weighed only 120 pounds, was too big for her own good. She believed in forgiveness. She believed that 8 years of friendship meant more than a few weeks of fighting. She agreed. As the sun set behind the West Virginia hills and the heat began to drop to a comfortable 75 degrees Fahrenheit, Skylar started to get ready. She didn't know that outside her room, in the darkness of the parking lot, it wasn't her friends waiting for her. It was executioners who had been sharpening their blades for days. For Sheila Eddy, this was a game, the final level she intended to play perfectly. For Rachel Schoaf, it was a nightmare she had allowed herself to be dragged into, and one from which there was no longer an escape. The car started. Ahead lay a 30-mile trip into the dark and the final 40 minutes of Skylar Neese's life. "We're here. Come out." 12:30 a.m. Skylar enters her room and closes the door. She knows her parents, Dave and Mary, are already asleep behind the wall. The apartment is silent, save for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of the highway. Skylar approaches the window. She takes nothing with her, no purse, no jacket, even though the night chill has begun to replace the day's heat, and the temperature has dropped to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. She is certain she will be back in an hour. She carefully removes the screen and places it on the floor. With one practiced movement, she is out on the grass. Her weight, a mere 120 pounds, allows her to move almost soundlessly. She crosses the parking lot and sees Sheila's familiar silver sedan. Skylar climbs into the back seat. Skylar says, "Hey." She tries to sound casual. Sheila Eddy is behind the wheel. She gives a short nod and smiles into the rearview mirror. Rachel, in the passenger seat, doesn't even turn around. She is staring out the side window. The car pulls away. They leave Morgantown, heading north toward the Pennsylvania border. Imagine this drive. 30 miles along dark, winding roads where the headlights catch nothing but endless walls of forest. Pop hits from that summer play on the radio. Sheila drives confidently, chatting about school and mutual friends, creating the illusion of those good old times Skylar had been so desperate to reclaim. Skylar begins to relax. She believes the ice is finally breaking. She doesn't notice Rachel Schoaf in the front seat, white-knuckled and gripping the door handle. She doesn't see the 2 kitchen knives with 6-inch blades hidden under the front floor mats. In the trunk, the shovels and a blue plastic bottle of bleach bounce rhythmically with every bump in the road. They cross the state line. The road becomes narrow and broken. Sheila turns onto a dirt path leading to a secluded hollow near the town of Brave. This is their spot, the place where they used to build bonfires and swear eternal friendship. The car stops. Sheila cuts the engine but leaves the headlights on. The beams pierce the darkness, casting long, ugly shadows from the trees. Sheila says, "Let's get out. I have cigarettes." They step out. Skylar takes a deep breath. The air here is cleaner, smelling of pine and damp earth. They walk about 20 feet into the woods. Sheila says, "Crap, I forgot the lighter in the car. Guys, wait here, I'll be right back." It was a rehearsed lie. Sheila goes to the car, but not for a lighter. She grabs the knives. Rachel stands next to Skylar, her body shaking, though it's hidden by the dark. Sheila returns, hands behind her back. She walks up to them, almost touching. The forest air feels electrified. Skylar stands with her back to her friends, looking up at the stars, which seem unbearably bright away from the city lights. She feels safe. She is with her sisters. Sheila takes a deep breath and utters the phrase. Her voice is calm, almost mundane, as if starting a children's game. Sheila says, 1, 2, 3. In that instant, Skylar Niece's world explodes in pain. Sheila delivers the first strike to her back. The knife enters easily, slicing through flesh and puncturing a lung. Skylar gasps, not a scream, but a startled, choking sound. She spins around, her eyes wide with terror. In the glare of the headlights, she sees her friends' faces. On Sheila's face, there is icy resolve. On Rachel's, a panic that has turned into rage. Skylar screams, "Why? Why are you doing this?" Instead of an answer, Rachel Schoaf lunges at her from the front. Skylar tries to defend herself. She grabs the blade with her bare hands, trying to push it away from her stomach. Detectives would later find cuts on her fingers reaching the bone, the marks of her desperate final struggle for life. Skylar tries to run. She makes it only 10 feet, tripping over roots and branches. No, Sheila Eddy is faster. She tackles her, pins her to the ground, and continues to strike. Blow after blow. In the neck, in the chest, in the face. Sheila's knife snaps at one point from the force of the attack, but she doesn't stop. In total, they will stab Skylar more than 50 times. Finally, Skylar goes silent. Her body, mangled and bloody, grows still in the dust of the forest road. A dead silence follows. The only sounds are the heavy breathing of 2 killers and the chirping of crickets, indifferent to the human tragedy. Rachel collapses to her knees and vomits. Sheila stands over the body, wiping sweat from her forehead. She is absolutely calm. She walks over to Skylar, leans down and stares into her glazed eyes. Sheila whispers, "Well, that's that." They fetch the shovels, but the plan hit a snag. The soil in this part of Pennsylvania is too rocky. They dig for 10 minutes, 15, but the hole barely reaches a depth of 1 foot. Sheila says, "It's useless. Let's just drag her deeper into the brush." They grab Skylar by the legs and haul her body, leaving a trail of blood on the fallen leaves. Deep in the woods, they pile old boards, branches, and rocks over her. Sheila covers Skylar's face with debris, as if she doesn't want her looking back at her from under the earth. They return to the car. Sheila pulls out the bleach. She methodically pours it over the back seat and the floor mats. They change into the clean clothes they had carefully packed. Their blood-soaked jeans and t-shirts are stuffed into trash bags. On the way back, they stop at a small creek. Sheila washes her hands, carefully scrubbing the blood from under her fingernails. She looks at her reflection in the dark water and fixes her hair. At 4 in the morning, Sheila drops Rachel off at her house. Sheila says, "Sleep tight. The problem is solved." Sheila goes home, gets into bed, and falls asleep. She sleeps soundly, without dreams, while miles away, Dave Niece walks into his daughter's empty room and sees the open window, where the first morning fly is already buzzing against the glass. It was Sheila Eddy. Her voice on the line was bright, with just a hint of morning rasp. Sheila says, "Hi, Mr. Niece. Is Skylar home? We went for a little drive last night, and I dropped her off around midnight. Did she make it inside?" It was a masterstroke of manipulation. Sheila didn't wait to be called. She struck first, creating her alibi and planting a false trail simultaneously. She told the parents she had dropped Skylar off at the corner instead of the front door because Skylar didn't want to wake them with the sound of the car. Dave believed her. How could he not believe the girl he treated like a second daughter? The Morgantown police were initially slow to react. A 16-year-old girl leaving through a window. To officers, it was a textbook runaway case. They told the parents, "Just wait, she'll come home when she's ready." They all rebel at this age. But Mary Neese knew better. Skylar weighed only 120 pounds and was a homebody. She hadn't taken her phone charger. She hadn't taken a jacket. She wasn't planning on being gone for long. Meanwhile, Sheila began her greatest performance. She became the shadow of the Neese family. She was there every single day. Imagine this. Sheila Eddy sitting on Skylar's bed, going through her things, helping Mary look through phone records. She hugged the grieving mother, feeling the heat of her tears, and whispered. Sheila says, "Don't cry, Mary. We're going to find her. I promise, we'll find her." It was the ultimate height of cynicism. While search parties combed the woods within a 10-mile radius of the city, Sheila was on the front lines. She handed out flyers with Skylar's face on them. She cried on the shoulder of the school counselor. She even took to Twitter, posting, "Skylar, please come home. I miss you so much. My heart is broken." But while Sheila thrived on the drama, Rachel Schoaf began to crumble. She stopped leaving her house. During that stifling week in July, when the West Virginia heat soared to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, Rachel sat in her room behind heavy curtains. She felt sick every time her phone buzzed with a notification. She watched Sheila lie with such terrifying ease, and it scared her even more than the murder itself. She realized she had tied herself to someone who wasn't entirely human. Investigators, however, were starting to find the first cracks. Detective Jessica Colbank, who was assigned to the case, had a sharp instinct for fakes. When she first interviewed Sheila and Rachel together, she noticed something chilling. The girls told their story using the exact same words. It wasn't a memory. It was a script. "You dropped her off at the corner?" Detective Colbank asked, staring hard at Sheila. Sheila says, "Yes." She waved at us and walked toward the apartment. It was about 12:30 a.m. The detective shifted her gaze to Rachel. Rachel looked away and nodded. Her hands were shaking under the table, white-knuckling the hem of her shirt. Then came the surveillance footage. Grainy video from the apartment complex showed the silver sedan entering the parking lot at 12:30 a.m. Skylar is seen climbing out the window and into the back seat. But a camera at the city limits caught that same car 3 hours later, coming back from a completely different direction. And there were only 2 people inside. Sheila didn't blink. She claimed that after dropping Skylar off, they just kept driving for a few hours. Sheila says, "We were listening to music, talking about boys. You know how it is with girls." But Twitter began to betray them. Skylar had been an active user, and detectives analyzed her final posts. "Sick of your lies," she had written. "You think you're going to get away with everything?" These weren't the posts of a happy girl planning to run away. These were the screams of a victim being backed into a corner. A month passed, then 2. August brought thunderstorms to Morgantown and a heavy sense of dread. The Neese family was desperate. Dave began his own investigation, driving for hours along the same roads Sheila claimed to have taken that night. He had no idea he had passed within a few hundred feet of the spot where his daughter lay, under a pile of branches and stones. The pressure from the police intensified. The FBI officially joined the case, realizing Skylar had likely been kidnapped. Sheila and Rachel were called in for questioning again and again. Sheila was a rock. She even started acting indignant with the investigators. Sheila says, "Why are you bothering me? I'm her best friend. I'm the one helping you the most." But Rachel Schoaf was at the breaking point. By December, when the snow began to fall and the temperature dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, she couldn't carry the weight anymore. Her parents saw that something horrific was happening to their daughter. She wasn't sleeping, she was barely eating. She had lost nearly 15 pounds. On December 28th, Rachel suffered a nervous breakdown. She began screaming, acting hysterically, and was eventually hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. There, in the silence of a hospital ward, away from the icy control of Sheila Eddy, the good girl mask finally shattered. She realized Sheila would never confess. Sheila would go to the end, and if necessary, she would throw Rachel under the bus. And so, Rachel Schoaf called a lawyer. On January 3, 2013, she left the clinic and went straight to the police station. She sat in a small interrogation room, looked at Detective Colbank, and spoke the words that tore through the 6-month nightmare. Rachel says, "We killed her. We planned it all back in June." At that very moment, Sheila Eddy was sitting at home, tweeting another joke about being bored. She had no idea her perfect script had just become her own death warrant. Rachel Schoaf sat in the back of a police SUV, looking pale, almost translucent. She was leading the investigative team along the same roads they had traveled 6 months earlier. But the landscape had changed. The lush green hollow where crickets had chirped in July had turned into a monochrome labyrinth of naked trunks and snowdrifts. Rachel says, "I'm not sure. Everything looks different. I think it was there, past that turn." Detectives spent hours scouring the woods. They used probes, metal detectors, and search dogs. Rachel led them from one tree to another, shaking from both the cold and the sheer terror of what they were doing. She knew that if the body wasn't found, her confession might be dismissed as the ramblings of a mentally unstable teenager, and Sheila would walk free once again. Finally, about 30 feet from the edge of the dirt road, an officer noticed a strange pile of branches and flat stones in a depression. When the snow was cleared away, the search team saw something that made even veteran forensic investigators look away. It wasn't Skylar, not the vibrant 120-pound girl from the flyers. 6 months in the elements, the work of scavengers, and the changing seasons had taken their toll. The remains were heavily skeletonized, but the details remained. Scraps of clothing, a familiar t-shirt, and most importantly, the rocky soil that had prevented the killers from digging a deep grave had effectively preserved her under that improvised cairn. While the experts worked in the woods, another stage of the investigation was unfolding back in Morgantown, one that was digital and technical. Police obtained a warrant for a full forensic search of Sheila Eddy's car. It was the same silver Toyota that Sheila had scrubbed with such ferocity. At first glance, the interior was pristine. Sheila had used so much bleach that the car still smelled of harsh chemicals. She was confident she had gotten away with it, but she had underestimated modern science. Criminalists pulled out the back seat, and there, in the narrow crevices between the iron frame and the upholstery, places no rag could reach, they found it. Blood. Dark stains that flared with a ghostly blue light under the spray of luminol. DNA testing confirmed it. This was Skylar Neese's blood, but the most shocking discovery came from the analysis of their Twitter accounts. Detectives hired cybersecurity specialists to recover deleted messages and analyze the timeline of their posts. What they saw was a portrait of true madness. Sheila Eddy had continued to post even on the days when the police had already found the remains but hadn't announced it publicly yet. One of Sheila's posts read, "We really did go to Pennsylvania," followed by a sad emoticon. She was playing with the police. She was enjoying her role as the star witness. She was so confident in her power over Rachel that she never even considered the possibility of betrayal. The investigation reconstructed a minute-by-minute chronology of that night. They now knew that while Dave and Mary Neese were frantic, searching the apartment for their daughter, Sheila and Rachel had gone into the bathroom at Sheila's house. They hadn't just washed their hands. They had methodically scrubbed the kitchen knives with abrasive cleaners. Those same knives were then returned to the block in Sheila's mother's kitchen. Imagine, for months, An unsuspecting Tara Eddy used those knives to cut bread and meat for dinner, while her daughter sat across from her, hiding the secret of 50 stab wounds. February 11th, 2013. The DNA results were final. The police had everything: the confession of one, the blood in the car of the other, and irrefutable digital evidence of their conspiracy. Sheila Eddy's arrest was planned like a surgical operation. Detectives knew she could be dangerous. They intercepted her in the parking lot of a local restaurant. When officers approached her and presented the warrant for her arrest on charges of first-degree murder, Sheila didn't become hysterical. She didn't scream about her innocence. She simply looked at Detective Colbank. It was a long, heavy gaze, devoid of any human emotion. Sheila says, "You're making a mistake." Those were the only words she spoke. Handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. The weight of those iron bracelets was nothing compared to the weight of the lies she had carried for half a year. At the same time, the phone rang at the Nice home. Dave picked up. He was told the remains had been found and identified. He walked out onto the balcony, looked at that window in Skylar's room, and for the first time in 6 months, he wept. But these weren't tears of relief. They were tears of the realization that the monsters he had been searching for across the state had been sitting in his living room, drinking his tea, the entire time. The exposure was complete. But the most important question remained. How would the justice system handle 2 girls who had committed a crime devoid of any meaning, other than a cold desire to delete a friend from their lives? The contrast between the 2 killers in the courtroom was so stark, it was more terrifying than the crime itself. Rachel Schoaf was the first to face the court. In May 2013, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She looked like a shadow of the energetic theater student she once was: hunched shoulders, a bowed head, and endless sobbing that nearly drowned out the words of her attorneys. When Rachel was given the floor for her final statement, she could barely stand. Her voice, broken by gasps, barely reached the back rows. Rachel says, I cannot find the words to express the depth of my remorse. I deprived the world of a beautiful person. I deprived parents of their only light, their only child. I betrayed everything I believed in. I will carry this weight, this image of Skylar in the woods, until my very last breath. Forgive me, if that is even possible. It looked like repentance. But to Skylar's parents, these words were merely bitter ash. They knew Rachel only spoke up when she realized she had been caught. But the true horror awaited the courtroom in January 2014, when Sheila Eddy took the stand. If you want to see the face of absolute, pure sociopathy, look at the footage from that day. Sheila entered the room with her head held high. She wasn't in a prison jumpsuit. Her parents had hired expensive lawyers and she was in civilian clothes. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, but that wasn't what was frightening. A slight, almost imperceptible smirk was frozen on her face. The same smirk Twitter users had seen in her selfies days after the murder. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She looked at Mary Nice with a cold, almost scientific interest, as if studying the suffering of another biological species. Sheila pleaded guilty to first-degree murder only to avoid the possibility of the death penalty, even though, as a minor, she was already facing a maximum of life. Dave Nice couldn't take it. His voice, cracked and full of poisonous rage, echoed through the hall when he was given the floor for his victim impact statement. Dave says, "Sheila Eddy, I looked you in the eye while you sat on my couch and lied to me. You ate my food, you hugged my wife, knowing what you had done to our daughter. You are not human. You are a monster who pretended to be our friend. You took our everything, our joy, our future, our faith in people. I hope every day of your life in prison reminds you of what you did. And I hope you never, do you hear me, never see daylight again." Sheila didn't even blink. She continued to stare straight ahead, adjusting her hair with her shackled hands. The sentences were read in dead silence. Rachel Schoaf was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Under the law, she gained the right to apply for parole only after serving a minimum of 10 years. It was a term many considered too lenient for participation in such a slaughter. Sheila Eddy was sentenced to life in prison. The judge, passing the sentence, noted her frightening lack of empathy and inability to feel human compassion. Under West Virginia law, she gained the right to a parole hearing after 15 years, but prosecutors made it clear they would do everything to ensure that right remained purely theoretical. As Sheila was led from the courtroom, the chains on her ankles clinked rhythmically and heavily against the tiled floor. She didn't turn back to look at her sobbing parents. She walked into the cold void of the prison blocks with the same icy dignity with which she had once counted 1, 2, 3 in the dark woods of Pennsylvania. Justice was achieved on paper, but that evening Morgantown did not celebrate. The town realized a terrible truth. Evil does not always come from the outside. Sometimes it grows in the house next door, goes to the same school, and smiles at you from a smartphone screen, planning your demise during a break between history lessons. But what became of those who turned her life to ash? Rachel Schoaf continues to serve her sentence. In 2023, she became eligible for parole for the first time. She wept before the board, spoke of God, of how she had changed, and how she prays for Skylar's soul every day. But Skylar's parents were there. Dave Neese looked at her and said just one phrase, "My daughter will never walk out of her grave, so why should you walk out of prison?" Her parole was denied. Rachel Schoaf remains behind bars, still trying to convince the world that she was a victim of circumstances and Sheila's influence. And Sheila Eddy herself? She remains true to her image until the end. In the Lacey Correctional Center, she is persona non grata. According to reports from fellow inmates, Sheila still carries herself as if she's the queen of the high school. Not a shadow of remorse, not a drop of sympathy. She is still that same girl who once counted 1, 2, 3. Only now her world is confined by concrete walls and barbed wire. Her eligibility for a parole hearing will come in a few years, but it is unlikely anyone in West Virginia will ever want to see her free again. Dave and Mary Neese never moved out of that apartment. They still live where their daughter once laughed. The window in Skylar's bedroom is now always closed and secured with several locks. Dave often takes his car and drives those same 30 miles to the site of her death. He sits on a folding chair by the memorial, looks out at the forest, and smokes, remembering the girl who weighed only 120 pounds, but whose love for life was boundless. This story is not just a tale of a murder. It is a warning. In a world where we measure friendship by the number of likes and enmity by petty comments online, it's easy to forget that behind every profile is a living, breathing human being. We often ask, where were the parents? No, the truth is, the parents were right there. They loved, they cared, they trusted. But they couldn't look under the masks that their children had learned to wear with the virtuosity of professional actors. Look at your friends. Look at those you trust with your secrets. Female friendship is a great power, but when it mutates into obsession and cold calculation, it becomes the most dangerous weapon in the world. Remember Skylar Neese. Remember her open smile and her final why, which still echoes through the woods of Pennsylvania when the temperature drops and the shadows grow long. Hold your children close, and never forget that sometimes the most terrifying evil is the one smiling back at you from the rearview mirror. Like this story if you found it interesting, and subscribe to the channel. I look forward to reading your thoughts on this case in the comments below. But what happens when that instinct is perverted? When the thirst for possession turns into a predatory hunt, and maternal care becomes nothing more than masterfully applied stage makeup? Look closely at the faces in the crowd. at the smiling neighbor baking apple pies, at the friend excitedly showing you her ultrasound photos. We see what we are allowed to see. But behind the facade of pink baby booties and cozy gatherings, a calculating, cold, predatory mind may be hiding. October 9th, 2020. The quiet town of New Boston, Texas. An ordinary morning, thick with the scent of dusty grass and heated asphalt. A police patrol stops a car flying down the highway at a frantic speed. Behind the wheel, a young woman. She's in a panic. On her lap lies a newborn baby whose life is fading with every passing second. She screams that she just gave birth, right here on the side of the road, just a few miles away. Her clothes are soaked in blood. She looks like a victim, like a terrified mother fighting for her child. But at that very same time, a few miles back, in a house that still smells of morning coffee, lies the one whose life was literally carved out of her body. This is the story of Taylor Parker, a woman who turned lies into art and her life into a grand performance, a performance whose finale was written not in ink, but in the blood of the one she called a friend. Welcome to a world where motherhood becomes a weapon of murder. Your likes and comments help promote our videos, and please subscribe to Crime Queen if you appreciate high-quality true crime videos. Thank you. To understand how a monster is born, we must first look at the woman, Taylor Renee Parker. To the residents of the small town of New Boston, she was one of their own, a 27-year-old blonde, outgoing, vibrant, and energetic. She was the kind of person who was always visible, the kind who knew how to fill every corner of a room. Taylor grew up in this part of Texas, where values are simple and clear: family, faith, children. To the local community, she was the embodiment of success, a young mother of two, active on social media, always looking impeccable. But if anyone, just anyone, had dared to look behind that perfectly polished facade, they wouldn't have seen a cozy home, but a hall of mirrors where truth and lies were twisted into an unbreakable knot. You see, Taylor had a trait that doctors would later call a pathological need for attention. She didn't just want to be loved, she wanted to be admired. It was vital for her to feel special, the heroine of her own novel. And for that status, she was willing to do anything. Even before the fatal events of 2020. Taylor's reputation in certain circles began to crack. Acquaintances remembered strange stories, petty theft, constant lying about trifles, mysterious illnesses that miraculously healed as soon as she received enough sympathy. But in the world of social media, where everyone is their own director, Taylor created the image of a supermom. However, there was one detail, one medical reality that simply didn't fit into her grand plan. Years earlier, Taylor had undergone a hysterectomy, the removal of her uterus. From a biological standpoint, the path to motherhood was closed to her forever. She knew it. Her family knew it. But for a woman whose mind feeds on deception, biology is merely an annoying obstacle. In 2019, Taylor met him, Wade Griffin, a sturdy, simple-hearted man who dreamed of a big family. To Taylor, he wasn't just a man, he was her primary audience. She realized, if she wanted to keep Wade, if she wanted to maintain the status of the perfect couple, she needed a baby, at any cost. And so, in early 2020, Taylor Parker made an announcement that would start the countdown to catastrophe. She was pregnant. It wasn't just a lie, it was a massive, months-long project. Taylor didn't just say, "I'm expecting." She began to act the pregnancy with terrifying dedication. She studied forums for expectant mothers, learning which symptoms should appear at which month. She spent hundreds of dollars on special prosthetic bellies that changed as the fetus grew. First, a barely noticeable bump, then a confident belly, and finally, the heavy gait of a woman in her 9th month. She complained of morning sickness. She demonstratively rubbed her lower back. She ordered baby clothes and a crib. But the most chilling part, she faked the ultrasound results. Taylor downloaded images from the internet and masterfully edited them in Photoshop. Inserting her own data and dates, she showed them to Wade, and he believed her. How could a man not believe when every evening he stroked her growing belly and felt, or so he thought, the baby's kicks? Taylor went so far that she even began taking special supplements and using breast stimulators to induce lactation and mimic hormonal changes. Her body was to lie as convincingly as her tongue. But time is a cruel judge for a liar. 9 months is a term that cannot be stretched. The calendar relentlessly pushed toward October. Wade was waiting for a son, the town was waiting for a celebration, and Taylor. Taylor knew her time was running out. In her closet lay piles of pink clothes, because she had announced it would be a girl. She had even chosen a name, Clancy Jewel. The gender reveal party, where expectant parents learned the baby's sex, was staged with royal scale, pink confetti, tears of joy, the applause of friends. No one, absolutely no one that evening noticed the icy stillness in Taylor's eyes. Behind the mask of a happy mother hid a predator who had already scouted her prey. She didn't just need a baby. She needed a baby that would be born exactly when she had scheduled it. Her choice fell on Reagan Simmons Hancock, 21 years old, a red-haired, kind, bright young woman. Reagan was an acquaintance of Taylor's, and she was truly biologically pregnant. Their due dates almost matched. Taylor began to worm her way into Reagan's confidence. She became her shadow. She gave gifts, asked for advice, inquired about every detail of the pregnancy. She studied Reagan, like a jeweler studies a stone, or like a butcher studies a carcass. She knew Reagan lived just a few miles away, in a cozy home, and that she was expecting her second daughter. Taylor didn't see a human being in Reagan. She saw an incubator, a living container for the prop Taylor needed for the finale of her play. October was approaching. Taylor Parker's lie reached its zenith. She announced to everyone that her C-section was scheduled for October 9th at a clinic a couple of hours away. It was the day the curtain had to rise. Either she would become a mother, or her world would collapse, burying her under the rubble of her own madness. Taylor chose the first option. She grabbed her bag, but there were no onesies inside. Inside was a scalpel. Psychologists often say that behind every great deception lies fear, a deep, primal, paralyzing fear of being not enough. For Taylor Parker, this fear had a name: Wade Griffin. Wade was the embodiment of the Texas ideal, a strong man, hard-working, outdoorsy, and, most importantly, he was desperate to leave a legacy. He wanted an heir. Taylor knew, or at least she convinced herself, that the only way to keep this man by her side, the only way to make his heart beat faster when he looked at her, was to give him a child. But there was a problem. A tiny, surgically precise detail from her past. Taylor couldn't have children. She was a hollow vessel, as she likely thought of herself in moments of self-loathing. And instead of confessing, instead of being vulnerable and honest, she chose the path of an architect of lies. Her relationship with Wade was like a house of cards built on a swamp. She fed him promises. She created the illusion of a shared future where they were the perfect family in a little house with a white picket fence. But the longer this fake pregnancy lasted, the higher the stakes became. Wade wasn't a fool, but he was in love. And love is the best anesthetic for common sense. However, even he began to notice oddities. Taylor refused to go to doctor's appointments with him. She always had excuses. The doctor moved the time. The clinic is under quarantine. I already did the labs myself. She played on his emotions, accusing him of a lack of trust, and he would back down. But inside Taylor, a storm was brewing. Imagine this state of mind. You wake up every morning, and the first thing you do is put on your belly. You check if the foam has shifted, if it's too light, if it looks natural under your shirt. You live in a constant state of waiting to be exposed. Every glance from a stranger, every question from a friend about due dates is a jolt of electricity. Taylor's motive wasn't impulsive. This wasn't pregnancy psychosis, as the defense would later try to hint. No, it was a cold, calculated project to maintain social status. In her world, a woman without a child was incomplete, and a woman caught in a lie about pregnancy would be an outcast. Death was preferable to shame for her. And here, at this point of no return, Reagan Simmons Hancock enters the picture. Reagan was everything Taylor was only pretending to be. She was young, just 21. She was sincere. She was truly happy. She had a loving husband, Homer, a 3-year-old daughter, and she was expecting a second baby girl whom they had already named Braxlyn. Taylor looked at Reagan and didn't see a friend. She saw a resource, a sort of spare part necessary to complete her own image. In Taylor's mind, a plan matured that is striking in its icy cruelty. She didn't just want a baby. She wanted this specific baby, a baby whose birth date fit perfectly into her schedule of lies. Taylor began to methodically prepare for the operation. These weren't thoughts like, what if? No. She began to study medical manuals. In her browser history, investigators would later find search queries. How to perform a C-section at 35 weeks. How to tell if the baby is alive. How to stop bleeding. She watched videos of actual births, not with tenderness, but with the cold attention of a self-taught surgeon. She even bought professional medical scrubs and a bag, so that at the right moment she would look like she belonged in any hospital. She chose Reagan because she was an easy target. Kind, trusting. She let Taylor into her home. She shared her fears and joys of motherhood, never suspecting that every story about how the baby was kicking only strengthened Taylor's resolve. Taylor led a double life. In the evenings, she tenderly discussed nursery wallpaper colors with Wade, and at night, she honed her plan of attack. She knew Reagan's daily routine. She knew when the husband went to work. She knew when the eldest daughter went to sleep. This wasn't a black widow killing for money. This was a new type of monster, a life snatcher. She didn't just want to take the child. She wanted to erase Reagan and take her place as the mother of that little girl. The cracks in her plan were multiplying. Wade started insisting on driving her to the C-section. Taylor realized October 9th was the finale, the last day she could be pregnant Taylor. The next morning, she would either have to present a living infant to the world or admit she was a pathological liar. And just days before the scheduled date, the predator entered the home stretch. She prepared the scalpel. She prepared the zip ties. She prepared her most convincing smile. Reagan Hancock was waiting for a celebration, her 22nd birthday and the birth of her daughter. She didn't know that her friend Taylor had already bought her a gift, a death sentence. Friday, October 9th, 2020. In East Texas, the morning was clear and warm, around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. In the town of New Boston, life was moving as it always did. People were drinking coffee, filling their tanks, rushing to work. At the same time, Taylor Parker, pregnant Taylor, was finishing her morning ritual. She strapped on that prosthetic belly one last time. She put on comfortable clothes. She kissed Wade goodbye. She told him she was heading to a clinic in Idabel, Oklahoma, about 40 miles north. That was where she was supposedly scheduled for her C-section. She even sent him a text, one filled with anticipation and tenderness. She wasn't just building an alibi for the police. She was building it for him, for her audience of one. But Taylor didn't go to Oklahoma. Instead, her SUV turned toward 100 Sand Ridge, the home of Reagan Simmons Hancock. Reagan was home alone with her 3-year-old daughter, Kinsley, her husband, Homer, had already left for work. Reagan was 35 weeks pregnant. She felt heavy, clumsy, but she was absolutely happy. She was waiting for her second little girl. Her home smelled of baby powder and fresh laundry. Around 9 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Picture the scene. Reagan opens the door and sees her friend. Taylor is smiling. Perhaps she brought a gift, or just stopped by to chat on her way to the hospital. Reagan, a kind soul, lets her in. She doesn't see that Taylor's bag doesn't hold baby clothes. Inside is a scalpel and a small knife Taylor had bought in advance. They walk into the kitchen. Kinsley is playing in the next room, and in an instant, the mask drops. Taylor didn't start with surgical precision. She started with fury. The first blow was to the head. Taylor used a blunt object to stun her victim, but Reagan, a 21-year-old mother, driven by the instinct to protect her unborn child, began to fight. It wasn't a quick kill. It was a slaughter that stretched on for endless minutes. Investigators would later find over 100 wounds on Reagan's body. 100. This wasn't just removing an obstacle. This was a frenzy. Taylor stabbed her in the face, the neck, the arms Reagan used to shield herself. Blood was everywhere, on the walls, on the floor, on the holiday cards standing on the shelf. Taylor, the woman who claimed to be so afraid of blood that she faked fainting spells, was now covered in it from head to toe, but she didn't stop. When Reagan, mangled and exhausted, collapsed onto the floor, she was still alive, she was still breathing, and, perhaps, she still understood what was happening. Taylor Parker knelt down beside her. Now she didn't need her acting skills. She needed the knowledge she had scavenged from YouTube tutorials. She reached for the scalpel. She began to cut. Rough, amateurish, but with a terrifying sense of purpose. She was performing what she called a C-section. She sliced through Reagan's abdomen, layer by layer. She was in a hurry. She knew the baby inside could die from a lack of oxygen, and she needed a living prop for her finale. At some point, amidst this nightmare, the sound of a child's voice broke the air. Little Kinsley walked into the room. She saw it. She saw Aunt Taylor leaning over her mother. We will never know exactly what those 3-year-old eyes witnessed, but Taylor simply barked at her, telling her to go to another room. And Kinsley, paralyzed by fear, obeyed. Taylor plunged her hands into the open wound. She literally ripped the placenta and the tiny baby girl from the womb of the dying Reagan. Baby Braxlin. She was tiny, just over 6 pounds. She was alive. She let out her first cry in a house soaked with her mother's blood. Taylor didn't stop to help Reagan. She left her lying on the kitchen floor, fading away in a pool of her own life's blood while her child watched. Taylor moved as if in a trance, yet with a haunting calculation. She put the infant in the car. She stuffed the placenta into a blue bag, the same one she would later show doctors as hers. She got behind the wheel. Her clothes were saturated with someone else's life. Her hands were shaking, but not from remorse, from adrenaline. The performance was still on. At 9:37 a.m., Taylor Parker flew onto the highway. She pushed her SUV to speeds that would make her get noticed. She wanted to be pulled over. She needed official confirmation of her birth. When a Texas state trooper flipped on his sirens and pulled her over near DeKalb, he expected a traffic violator. Instead, he found a woman screaming, "My baby! She's not breathing! Help her! I just gave birth right here on the side of the road!" Taylor was clutching Braxlin. An umbilical cord was hanging from under her clothes. One Taylor had tucked there herself to mimic a recent delivery. She looked like a mother in agony. The trooper began performing CPR on the infant right there on the hood of the car. An ambulance arrived. Taylor kept up the act. In the back of the ambulance, she insisted the placenta was hers. She refused to let the medics examine her, claiming she was fine and that all attention must stay on the baby. But there was one detail. One thing Taylor couldn't account for. The experienced paramedics noticed that the woman who supposedly just went through a traumatic roadside birth looked suspiciously clean in certain places and far too bloody in others. Meanwhile, back in New Boston, Reagan's mother, worried that her daughter wasn't answering the phone, was walking into 100 Sandridge. The door was unlocked. She saw Kinsley standing in the hallway, and then she saw what was left of her eldest daughter on the kitchen floor. In that moment, two realities collided. The reality of the monstrous truth at the Hancock home, and the reality of the bloody lie in the ambulance racing toward the hospital. Taylor Parker believed she had committed the perfect crime. She believed the scalpel had made her a mother, but she forgot. That blood doesn't just give life, it cries out for justice. McCurtain Memorial Hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma. It was just 40 miles from the crime scene, but for Taylor Parker, this was the stage for her triumph. She rolled into the emergency room on a gurney, disheveled, bloody, her face contorted in maternal agony. Doctors and nurses rushed to her side. In their eyes, she was a heroine, a woman who had endured a traumatic roadside birth. Taylor kept up the act. She wept, begging them to save her baby girl. But here, under the unforgiving glare of the fluorescent lights, her performance began to splinter. You see, medicine is a science of facts, not emotions. And the facts began to scream. The first warning sign was the infant. Little Braxlyn Sage was in critical condition. Her skin was blue. She couldn't breathe on her own. But the doctors noticed something strange. The umbilical cord hadn't just been unprofessionally cut. It was torn and tied in a way that looked like someone was trying to hide the method of separation from the placenta. The second warning sign was Taylor herself. According to protocol, a woman who has just given birth must be examined immediately. Doctors need to check the placenta, the risk of hemorrhage, and the state of the uterus. But Taylor, this exhausted mother, flatly refused an exam. She claimed she was fine. She became aggressive the moment doctors tried to get close to her body. She knew. One look from a gynecologist and the fairy tale of her pregnancy would turn into evidence for a life sentence. She had no uterus. She had no birth canal that a child could have passed through. She was physiologically dry. While Taylor played her part in Oklahoma, back in Texas, at 100 Sandridge, a true nightmare was unfolding. The detectives who arrived at the scene froze at the threshold. They had seen much. Texas is a rugged state. But this was beyond human comprehension. Reagan Simmons Hancock lay on the floor, her body looking like a map of jagged roads. Experts would later count more than 100 stab and puncture wounds. Taylor hadn't just killed, she had methodically destroyed the flesh to get to what was inside. The most horrific discovery awaited them in Reagan's empty womb. The detectives realized the baby was gone. The abdomen had been sliced open with surgical arrogance. The connection between the bloody roadside birth and the eviscerated woman in New Boston was instantaneous. Dispatchers broadcast the description of Taylor's car, and when Detective Dustin Thomas walked into Taylor Parker's hospital room in Oklahoma, the mask began to melt. He didn't play her games. He asked her directly, "Taylor, whose baby is this?" She didn't flinch. She looked him in the eye and insisted, "Mine. This is Clancy Jewell. I gave birth to her." But the police had already checked her story. Taylor claimed she was a patient at the clinic in Idabel. When the detectives called, the answer was short, "We have never had a patient by that name." Then the doctors at McCurtain Memorial tried a ruse. They told Taylor that to save the baby's life, They needed to know the mother's blood type and the results of the tests from her clinic. Taylor tripped over her own words. She started naming doctors who didn't exist and appointment dates that didn't match the calendar. In the NICU, the tiny heart of Braxlyn Sage, the girl who never knew the warmth of her mother's arms, stopped beating. She had lived only a few hours. She didn't die from disease. She died from the brutal way she had been ripped from the only world where she was supposed to be safe. For Taylor, this was a catastrophe. Not because a child had died, but because her primary prop no longer worked. When Detective Thomas informed her she was under arrest for murder and kidnapping, Taylor Parker did what all pathological liars do when cornered. She changed her tactic. "It was mutual," she whispered. "Reagan wanted to give me the baby. She asked me to cut her out." The lie was so monstrous, so absurd in the face of 100 stab wounds, that even the most seasoned investigators shuddered. In Taylor's bag, the one she had dragged into the hospital, they found more than just a scalpel. They found Reagan's placenta. Taylor had kept it like a trophy, like proof of her fictional motherhood. She was still in her clothes, saturated with Reagan's blood. She still smelled of death. But in her eyes, there wasn't a single drop of remorse. Only rage. Rage because her show had been shut down just before the final applause. The entire town, which only yesterday had been preparing for celebrations, fell into an icy numbness. New Boston realized a monster had been living among them. And that monster had been smiling at them on the playground. While Taylor Parker sat in a cell, still trying to drape herself in the remnants of her fictional identity, a team of detectives began to dissect her life, and what they uncovered made even veteran experts recoil. This was no sudden snap. This was an architecture of evil built over months. Investigators seized Taylor's phone and computer, and there, in the digital memory, lay a roadmap to hell. For months leading up to the murder, Taylor had spent hours watching videos, not of child rearing, but of actual C-section procedures. She searched for answers to questions like how to extract a baby and keep it alive, when to cut the umbilical cord, and how much blood does a woman lose during a deep abdominal incision. She wasn't just a liar, she was a diligent student of death. Detectives found that Taylor had used a specialized app to create fake ultrasound images. She didn't just download pictures, she meticulously edited them, changing dates and names so that every time Wade or her mother asked for an update, she had fresh proof. But the most shocking discovery was her trip the day before the murder. The GPS in her car revealed that on October 8th, Taylor Parker drove over 100 miles, methodically visiting stores and pharmacies. She wasn't buying diapers. She purchased a set of professional knives, antiseptics, and those blue bags where Reagan's remains would later be found. She was preparing for a harvest. The investigation also exposed a financial abyss. To maintain her image of success, Taylor had been embezzling from her employers and even stealing from her own friends. The sums reached tens of thousands of dollars. She was living on borrowed time, in every sense of the word. And the baby, this fictional baby, was supposed to be her ultimate asset, the thing that would reset her life and make everyone forget her eccentricities. Detective Dustin Thomas would later say, "She believed that if she created enough visual evidence, the belly, the photos, the nursery, then reality would simply give in. She thought she could deceive nature itself." And what about Wade? The man who believed her until the very end? When the police showed Wade Griffin the medical records confirming that his pregnant fiancée had been physically incapable of having children for years, he simply went silent. His world didn't just collapse, it vanished. The man who had stroked Taylor's prosthetic belly, who had spoken to Clancy Jewell through layers of foam and fabric, realized that all this time he had been sleeping next to a predator. But Taylor made one fatal mistake, a mistake born of her own arrogance. She was so confident in her acting abilities that she left her phone on inside Reagan's house during the attack. Cell tower pings tracked her movements with mathematical precision. Surveillance cameras at a nearby gas station captured her car at 9 a.m., the exact moment she was parking at the victim's home. And then came the most undeniable, most terrifying evidence: DNA. Under Reagan Simmons Hancock's fingernails, they found traces of Taylor's skin. Reagan had fought for her life and the life of her daughter with the fury of a wounded lioness. She left marks on her killer that no amount of makeup could hide. Investigators reconstructed a minute-by-minute timeline of that day. Taylor entered the house at 9:02 a.m. She left at 9:35 a.m., 33 minutes. That was all it took for her to turn a cozy kitchen into a slaughterhouse and destroy the lives of two families. In the interrogation room, Taylor acted strangely. She would drift into catatonia, then suddenly start flirting with the officers. She was still trying to manipulate. She claimed Reagan was her best friend and that she only wanted to help. But when they confronted her with her search history, when they showed her photos of the scalpel found in her car, Taylor Parker went quiet. Her eyes turned cold like a Texas night in winter. The mask was finally shattered. Sitting before the detectives wasn't a distraught woman who lost her mind. It was a cold-blooded killer whose only regret was that she got caught. She hoped she'd be found insane. She hoped for the jury's sympathy. No, Taylor Parker forgot one thing. In Texas, for crimes like these, you pay the ultimate price. September 2022, Bowie County, Texas. 2 years after quiet New Boston was choked by horror, Taylor Parker stood trial. This proceeding was unlike any ordinary hearing. It was a clash of two worlds: the world of the absolute, tangible pain of the Hancock family, and the world of icy indifference belonging to the woman sitting at the defense table. Taylor Parker looked different. She had traded her bright outfits for modest blouses. She sat motionless, rarely glancing toward Reagan's relatives. But the jurors, 12 ordinary people from Texas, weren't looking at her clothes. They were looking at the photos of the evidence. Taylor's defense tried to play the insanity card. They brought in experts, spoke of a dissociative state, argued that Taylor had drifted so deep into her own lie that she became its victim. They tried to convince the jury that she didn't understand what she was doing, but the prosecution struck back. She understood everything, down to the last inch of the incision on Reagan's abdomen. The prosecutor's voice thundered. She wasn't mad, she was meticulous. They reminded the court of how Taylor studied medicine, how she bought the scalpel, how she masterfully lied to Wade for months. This is not the behavior of a madman. This is the behavior of a strategist. The emotional peak came with the testimony of Homer Hancock, Reagan's widower. He stood on the stand, a man whose life had been burned to the ground. He spoke of how their 3-year-old daughter still asks when mommy is coming home. He spoke of Braxlyn, the daughter he never got to hold alive. Taylor Parker listened with a mask-like face. Not a single tear, not a quiver of the lip. She looked like someone just watching a boring movie. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty, on all counts: capital murder, kidnapping. In the state of Texas, there are only 2 paths for such a crime: life in prison without the possibility of parole, or the death penalty. November 9th, 2022. The judge read the sentence: death. Taylor Parker became one of only 7 women in Texas awaiting execution. For the U.S. justice system, this is an extremely rare case. No, Taylor's cruelty, her total lack of humanity, left the court with no choice. As the sentence was read, silence fell over the room. This was not a victory. In cases like this, there are no winners. There is only justice, bitter as ash. Taylor was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Her performance was officially over. The curtain fell, leaving her in a solitary cell at the Gatesville unit, where she must wait for the only finale she cannot direct. The story of Taylor Parker is more than just a chronicle of one person's madness. It is a grim reminder of how far a human being can go in an attempt to fill an internal void. In a world where social status and the perfect image of motherhood are sometimes valued more than life itself, Taylor chose the most horrific way possible to become special. She wanted to be a creator, but she became a destroyer. She built a temple out of lies, but a foundation mixed with blood could never stand. Today, in 2026, Taylor Parker continues to wait for her turn on death row in Texas. Her days are monotonous and gray, the complete opposite of that vibrant, fake life she once invented for herself. She has no audience left, no Wade, no sympathetic friends, no prosthetic bellies. There is only her and the truth, a truth she can no longer outrun. And in New Boston, Homer Hancock continues to raise his daughter, Kinsley. He is teaching her to be strong, and he keeps alive the memory of the red-haired mother who loved her more than life itself. He is doing the one thing Taylor was never capable of. He is living a real life. Without sets, without props, with an open, though deeply scarred heart. As you look into the faces of strangers, at the smiles of casual acquaintances, remember this story. The most terrifying monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they wear pink dresses, they give gifts, and they smile at you from ultrasound photos. Because the deepest waters are the ones we create ourselves out of our own deceptions. Stay safe and never trust the masks. Like this story if you found it interesting, and subscribe to the channel. I look forward to reading your thoughts on this case in the comments below. They say a mother's love is the purest force in the universe, an instinctive, primal drive that forces a woman to rush into a fire for her child. We've grown accustomed to believing that a mother's arms are the safest place on earth. But what happens when those same arms, while gently stroking a child's head, are simultaneously administering poison and doing it under the glare of a camera lens, all for the sake of a few hundred admiring comments? In the age of social media, we've learned to put our lives on display. We crave recognition, sympathy, validation. But for Lacey Spears, ordinary attention wasn't enough. She needed something more. She needed the status of a grand martyr, a saintly mother whose path was an endless struggle against an invisible enemy devouring her angel. January 2014, New York, Westchester Medical Center. It's quiet in room 516. The only sounds are the rhythmic beep of monitors and the soft tapping of fingers on a smartphone screen. Lacey Spears is writing another post for her blog, Garnett's Journey. The photo shows her 5-year-old son, Garnett, a boy with a mop of golden hair and huge, trusting eyes. The caption reads, "My brave warrior is in trouble again. Pray for us." In that moment, thousands of people around the world are refreshing their feeds, leaving hearts and words of support. They don't know that just minutes before, Lacey had taken her son to the bathroom, far from the cameras and the eyes of the nurses, and did something that turned his blood into a lethal brine. This isn't just a story about a murder. It is a chronicle of a monstrous performance where we were the audience, and the price of the ticket was the life of a 5-year-old boy who, until his very last breath, believed his mother was saving him. Welcome to a world where compassion becomes currency, and motherhood, a deadly weapon. Your likes and comments help promote our videos, and please subscribe to Crime Queen if you appreciate high-quality true crime videos. Thank you. Those who knew her in her youth remember Lacey was always different. She didn't just tell stories, she created alternative realities. She would claim to be terminally ill, or invent a tragedy just to be the topic of conversation in the school hallway. It was a hunger, an almost physical need to be watched, to be pitied, to be admired. In 2008, when Lacey was 20, she became pregnant. For many, it was a surprise, but Lacey instantly turned her pregnancy into a dramatic saga. She announced that the father was Blake, a brave police officer, her great love, who had tragically died in a car accident. She described him as a hero, mourning him on social media, gathering the first crumbs of the very sympathy that would soon become her primary drug. Was any of it true? Not a word. Blake was alive. He wasn't a police officer. He was an ordinary guy she had a brief fling with. He didn't even know Lacey was pregnant. She simply erased the real man and replaced him with a convenient myth. A dead hero father is the perfect backdrop for the image of a grieving single mother struck by tragedy. On December 3, 2008, Garnett Paul Spears was born, a tiny boy weighing just 6 pounds 2 ounces. From that moment on, Lacey's life completely migrated into the camera lens. The first months of Garnett's life should have been a time of tenderness, but for Lacey, they were a time for diagnoses. The boy wasn't even 9 weeks old when she began regularly bringing him to emergency rooms. She claimed he was constantly spitting up food, having terrible seizures, and passing out. Doctors ran tests, but the results came back normal time and again. But Lacey was persistent. She was the ideal mother, always there, always recording every movement of the child in a notebook, always speaking in a low, tremor-filled voice of anxiety. And the doctors began to give in. Under her pressure, Garnett had a gastrostomy tube, a feeding tube inserted directly into his stomach through the abdominal wall, installed. Lacey convinced the medics that her son couldn't eat on his own, that he was wasting away. This was her first major victory. Now she had an officially sick child. Now she had physical access to his internal organs, a tube through which she could introduce not just nutritional formulas, but anything at all. By age 2, Garnett's medical file was thicker than an elderly man's. Ear infections, digestive issues, mysterious sodium spikes. To avoid suspicion from overly inquisitive doctors in Alabama, Lacey began to drift. She moved to Florida, then to New York, to the fellowship community in Chestnut Ridge, a sort of utopian settlement for artists and volunteers. In the fellowship, Lacey was greeted like a saint, a fragile blonde raising a severely ill son alone. She seemed the definition of resilience. She often walked with Garnett along the wooded trails, covering 2 to 3 miles a day, pushing him in a stroller when he was too weak. But the moment she saw a passerby, she would immediately start adjusting the tube on her son's belly, drawing attention to his ailment. She created the blog Garnett's Journey on MySpace, later moving it to Twitter and Facebook. It was her personal series. Every one of Garnett's hospitalizations was accompanied by dozens of posts. "We're in the hospital again. My heart is broken, but my boy is a fighter." Today, Garnett's temperature rose to 102 degrees Fahrenheit. I won't close my eyes. She documented his every breath. She photographed his pale face against the white sheets, and the world responded with love. Thousands of comments. "You're the best mom in the world. Lacey, you're an inspiration to us all." She wasn't just blogging. She was literally feeding off this energy. But there was one problem. For the show to continue, Garnett could not get well. As soon as the boy started to improve, interest in the blog dropped, and that meant the illness had to be fed, and Lacey knew exactly how to do it. Salt, common table salt, found in every kitchen. In large doses, it turns into a lethal poison, causing brain swelling and a slow, agonizing death. Lacey Spears began turning her home and hospital rooms into a laboratory, where she slowly, milligram by milligram, was killing the only being who loved her unconditionally. Lacey settled into a small, cozy house. Neighbors often saw her on the porch, She would sit in a chair, hugging Garnett close, intensely typing away on her phone. To those around her, it was a picture of supreme devotion. They saw a woman who had left everything behind to dedicate herself to a special child. But if anyone could have peeked inside her head, or at least into her browser search history, the idol would have crumbled to dust. What was her motive? Money? No, Lacey wasn't receiving massive payouts. Power? Perhaps. But her primary drug was recognition. In psychology, this is known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. It is a condition where a caregiver, most often a mother, intentionally causes symptoms of illness in a child to gain attention and sympathy for herself. For Lacey Spears, this syndrome mutated, fueled by the era of digital exhibitionism. She created a digital altar where she daily sacrificed her own son's health. Garnett was her primary project, her ticket to a world where she was the heroine. The relationship between mother and son was hauntingly close. Garnett, who had turned 5 by 2014, was a charming child. Cheerful and affectionate, he loved playing with toy cars and feeding the neighbors' chickens. But he lived in a constant state of fear regarding his own weakness. Lacey had convinced him that he was terminally ill, that without her medicines and her care, he wouldn't survive. Imagine this contrast: a boy weighing only about 40 pounds, pale, with dark circles under his eyes, and his mother, blooming, active, always with a smile for the public. Cracks in her mask began to appear whenever Garnett managed to slip away from her care. Daycare workers and friends from the community noticed something strange. When Lacey wasn't around, Garnett transformed. He ate regular food with an appetite. He ran, he laughed. He had no seizures. He wasn't nauseous. He was an ordinary, healthy 5-year-old boy. But the moment Lacey appeared at the door, the moment she took his hand, the boy would instantly fade. He became lethargic, complaining of stomach pains. She would immediately grab her phone. "Another episode," she would whisper into the lens. "My poor boy is losing his strength." Lacey hated it when Garnett got better. For her, his recovery meant oblivion. If he was healthy, she was just an ordinary woman. If he was sick, she was a saint. Doctors in local clinics began asking questions. Why did the sodium levels in the child's blood jump so illogically? In natural illnesses, levels rise or fall gradually. In Garnett, they spiked to critical marks in minutes, as if someone were pouring concentrated brine into him. Lacey had a plan, cold, calculated. The Black Widow of motherhood did not act on impulse. She studied. Later, investigators would find her search queries: effects of high sodium in children, lethal dose of salt. Can a doctor determine salt poisoning in children? She knew what she was doing. She understood that every new portion of salt through the tube in Garnett's stomach was a step toward his grave. No, the thirst for likes was stronger than fear. She watched her follower count grow. She saw people weeping over her posts. And she decided it was time to bring this drama to its finale. In January 2014, Garnett fell ill once again. Lacey insisted on hospitalization at Westchester Medical Center. She didn't take him there to save him. She took him there to stage his final, loudest show. In her bag, among the children's clothes and toys, lay a bag of saline solution. Her weapon, her tool for creating the perfect content. She was ready. She was in anticipation, for the world was about to witness her greatest grief and reward her for it with her greatest portion of sympathy. Lacey Spears looks exhausted. She is in her favorite role, the hero mother who hasn't slept in days. But if you look closer, her movements are too calculated. She arranges things in room 516 as if she's setting a stage for a film production. A cartoon character blanket, Garnett's favorite teddy bear, and, most importantly, her iPhone charger. The show begins. Garnett was hospitalized with complaints of seizures. But as soon as he is under observation, his condition stabilizes. The doctors are puzzled. The boy is cheerful, he's playing, he weighs a steady 40 pounds, and his body temperature is a perfect 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. But this doesn't suit Lacey. She needs a crisis. She needs likes. January 19th, morning. Lacey writes on Twitter, "My sweet angel is very sick. The doctors don't know what to do. Please pray." At that very moment, Garnett feels fine, but Mommy says he needs to clear his tube. She takes him by the hand and leads him into the bathroom. It is the only place in the room that is not captured by the security camera. They stay there for 15 minutes. When they come out, Garnett is unrecognizable. He begins to vomit. He clutches his stomach, his tiny body racked with spasms. He cries, a quiet, choking sob. Lacey doesn't call the doctor right away. First, she takes out her phone. She takes a picture. By the time the nurses rush into the room, the sodium level in Garnett's blood has spiked to 182 millimoles per liter. This is unthinkable. This is a level where blood turns into poison. The doctors are in a panic. They don't understand how this is possible in a closed unit. A normal person would slip into a coma after this. But Garnett, his body, hardened by his mother's constant torture, fights back. January 21st, the climax. Garnett has improved slightly, and doctors have begun to hope for a miracle. But for Lacey, a miracle is a death sentence for her career. If he survives and recovers, she will be discharged. Back to the gray, back to obscurity. At 10:30 a.m., the hallway camera catches Lacey. She is walking to the bathroom, leading Garnett behind her. The boy walks slowly. He is weak. He trusts her. In Lacey's hand is a plastic cup. In it, the concentrated salt solution she prepared earlier. They go inside. The door closes. What happened during those minutes? We can only guess based on the cold logic of forensic experts. Lacey opens the valve of the gastrostomy tube on her son's stomach. She introduces the salty death directly into his gut. It causes an immediate, horrific chemical burn from the inside. The child begins to vomit uncontrollably. His brain starts to swell as the salt pulls every drop of water out of his cells. They leave the bathroom. Lacey leads him to the bed. She is calm. She is absolutely ice cold. She tucks him in, covers him with a blanket, and sits in a chair. 10 minutes pass, 20 minutes. Garnett is in agony. His body arches. He has gone blind from the pressure in his brain. Lacey Spears picks up her phone. She opens Facebook. "Garnett is doing very, very poorly. I'm afraid I'm losing him," she types, while her son dies 3 feet away from her. She waits. She needs the damage to be irreversible. Only when Garnett stops breathing does she press the call button for the staff. A resuscitation team bursts into the room. Chaos ensues. Shouts, the sound of a defibrillator, doctors piling onto the small body. And what does Lacey do? She backs away to the wall and films it all. She is documenting her child's death in real time. The doctors record it. The sodium level in Garnett's blood is 200. This is a world record in cruelty. His brain has effectively cooked in a salt solution. He is moved to the ICU and placed on a ventilator. He is brain dead. Lacey sits in the hallway. Around her are friends from the community who rush to support the poor mother. She cries, but her tears are dry. She is constantly checking the number of shares on her latest post. "My little hero is going to be with the angels," she writes. At that moment, one of the doctors, reviewing the security footage and the lab results, begins to realize that something is very wrong. Too many coincidences, too much salt, too much social media. Garnett Spears died on January 23, 2014. He didn't die of a disease. He died of his mother's thirst for recognition. In his stomach, during the autopsy, they will find an amount of sodium equivalent to several tablespoons of pure salt. Lacey Spears achieved her goal. The whole world knew of her grief. The whole world sympathized with her. She received thousands of messages. She was the center of attention. But she didn't know one thing. Detectives had already signed a search warrant for her home, and what they find there will forever erase the filters from her perfect photographs. In the days following the tragedy, Lacey played the part of the perfect widow of her own motherhood. She returned to the fellowship community, to her cozy little house in Chestnut Ridge. Neighbors brought her food, flowers, and offered support. She accepted it all with a demure nod, staring into the distance with those translucent eyes. But behind that facade, a feverish effort was underway to erase her tracks. While Garnett was still lying in the morgue, Lacey called her close friend from the community, Valerie. Her voice on the phone didn't shake. It was quiet, soft, businesslike. "Valerie, honey, do me a favor," Lacey whispered. "Go to my house. There's a feeding bag with a tube on the shelf, the one we used last. Please take it and just throw it away. I don't want to see anything that reminds me of his suffering." Valerie, moved by compassion, agreed. She didn't know yet that Lacey was asking her to destroy the smoking gun, the bag that still contained traces of concentrated saline. Lacey was confident. If the bag was gone, her guilt was impossible to prove. She thought she was smarter than all the detectives in Westchester. But the doctors were no fools. A committee was already at work in the hospital. Dr. Deborah Jeevens, a specialist in child abuse, was studying Garnett's medical history. She saw those sodium spikes, 182, 200. This doesn't happen from a mysterious illness. This happens when someone feeds a child the equivalent of 69 McDonald's salt packets in one sitting. The detectives began to ask questions, cautiously at first. "Miss Spears, tell us again, what exactly did Garnett eat before he got sick?" Lacey's answers were rehearsed. She described the symptoms. She tangled herself in the details. But she always returned to one thing. "He was very sick from birth. I'm the only one who fought for him." The suspicion deepened when police obtained the security footage from the hospital. Those 15 minutes in the bathroom. The video showed Lacey leading a living, albeit weak, boy into the bathroom, and coming out with a creature that could barely stand. She carried him in her arms back to the bed, and her face, it wasn't panicked. It showed a strange, haunting satisfaction. When detectives arrived at her home in Chestnut Ridge, Lacey met them in a black dress. She looked like a grieving Madonna. "Are you here to take his things?" she asked. "No, Lacey. We're here to understand why he died," the detective replied. They began the search, and the home of the ideal mother began to surrender its secrets. In the cupboard, behind jars of baby food, they found stockpiles of salt, huge bags of sea salt and table salt. But that wasn't the worst of it. In the trash can outside Valerie's house, police discovered the feeding bag. Lacey had been too late. Valerie, sensing something was wrong, hadn't thrown it far. She had simply hidden it. Forensic testing of the bag's contents revealed a sodium concentration comparable to the water in the Dead Sea. Meanwhile, Lacey continued her game on social media. She posted photos of an empty crib. She wrote about how much she missed the scent of his hair. She even organized a fundraiser for the funeral, even though the community had already paid for everything. She didn't hide. She didn't run. She was too confident in her mask. She believed her status as a grieving mother was a bulletproof vest that no investigation could pierce. But the circle was tightening. People in the community began to whisper. Friends who had once defended her now remembered the oddities, how she made Garnett wear sunglasses indoors, how she forbade him from playing with other children, claiming he had allergies to everything. The moment the mask shattered completely happened during the first official interrogation at the police station. Lacey sat in a room with white walls. In front of her, they laid out photos of Garnett's lab results. "Lacey, how did the salt get into his tube?" the detective asked. She was silent. Her eyes, always so expressive in her Instagram photos, turned cold, like two chips of ice. She wasn't crying anymore. She realized the show was over, but she didn't know that the fatal blow wouldn't come from the salt, but from her own phone. Technicians recovered her search history, and when the detective read out the list of queries, lethal dose of sodium for a 40-pound child. The room became so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. It wasn't the disappearance of a criminal into the woods. It was the disappearance of the human being inside that fragile blonde. Sitting before the police was a hollow shell that cared about only one thing. How do I look in this photograph? The investigation centered on that magic tube in Garnett's stomach. Detectives quickly realized that the gastrostomy tube, which was supposed to save the boy's life, had become a portal for Lacey to deliver death. Toxicologists confirmed the investigators' darkest fears: a sodium level in the blood, exceeding 180 millimoles per liter, simply does not occur in nature, even in the most severe cases of kidney disease. It was the equivalent of forcing a child to drink a glass of seawater with 10 times the salt concentration of the ocean. But Lacey was arrogant. She believed her digital army of followers would protect her. She made the classic mistake of every narcissist. She believed she was the smartest person in the room. She didn't know that her friend Valerie, the one she had tasked with throwing away the trash, was already giving a statement. Valerie handed over the feeding bag Lacey had tried to destroy. Inside, forensic experts found liquid residue, with a salt concentration equal to 69 McDonald's salt packets. This wasn't a dosage error. It was a concentrate for murder. Investigators began to dig deeper into Lacey's past, and the mask of the ideal mother shattered into 1,000 pieces. They discovered that Lacey had been lying about her son's health for years. She had taken him to 20 different doctors across 5 different states, traveling hundreds of miles, as soon as physicians began to suspect that Garnett was actually healthy. She was doctor shopping, searching for those who were gullible enough to prescribe another procedure or surgery. The most crushing blow to her defense, however, came from her own MacBook. A team of cyber investigators recovered her Google search history, which she had fruitlessly tried to delete. While Garnett lay in his hospital bed, Lacey, sitting just 2 feet away, was searching, "How does high sodium affect a child's brain?" and "lethal dose of salt." She was studying the symptoms of an overdose so she could mimic them for the doctors. She was the screenwriter, the director, and the executioner, all in one. Detectives also found photographs that Lacey hadn't yet published. In them, Garnett didn't look like a brave warrior. He looked like a tormented, terrified victim. There were shots of him crying in pain while she simply adjusted the lighting and the filter. When Lacey was officially brought in for questioning as a suspect, she was eerily calm. No panic, no cries of injustice. She sat in the interrogation room with her back straight, her voice like ice. When presented with the evidence of the poisoning through the tube, she merely shrugged. "I don't know how that got in there," she repeated in a monotone voice. "I only loved him." Her alibi collapsed instantly. She claimed Garnett had somehow found the salt himself, but a 5-year-old in his condition couldn't physically consume that much salt without an immediate gag reflex. The only way to bypass the body's natural defenses was to pump it directly into the stomach through the port. And only Lacey had access to that port during those fatal 15 minutes in the hospital bathroom. The investigators also discovered that Lacey had been salt-feeding Garnett at home for years. Neighbors in the fellowship community began to remember how the boy often complained of an unbearable thirst. He would beg for water as if he were walking through a desert at 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Now they understood why. His mother was intentionally dehydrating him, turning his life into an endless torture of thirst. The final nail in the coffin was the surveillance footage. Lacey entering the bathroom with a plastic cup and leaving with it empty. Her magic of sympathy was built on the simple, filthy mechanics of poisoning. She was trapped by her own vanity, caught in a world where her digital history became her most terrifying accuser. The prosecution left her no room to breathe. On the massive screens in the courtroom, they played those same 15 minutes from the hospital hallway. We watched as she led Garnett into the bathroom, and as she emerged, carrying his limp body. Doctors took the stand, one after another. They spoke of a toxic environment, of unexplained sodium spikes, and of the fact that the salt level in the body of a 5-year-old boy, weighing only 40 pounds, was equivalent to a lethal injection. Computer experts read out her search queries, and every word, death by sodium, suffering during overdose, sounded like a hammer blow against her defense. Lacey didn't shed a single tear. She listened to descriptions of how her son died in agony, how his brain literally burst from the pressure, and not a single muscle on her face twitched. She refused to testify in her own defense. She simply remained silent, huddled in her cardigan, as if trying to hide from the reality she herself had manufactured. Her lawyers tried to shift the blame onto the doctors, claiming medical malpractice, but against the video footage and the browser history, their arguments crumbled to dust. It took the jury less than 3 days to return a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. In April 2015, Judge Robert Neary, while pronouncing the sentence, did not hide his disgust. He looked at Lacey and saw not a victim of circumstance, but a cold, calculating manipulator. Your crime is unfathomable in its cruelty. You turned your own child's life into an endless series of tortures, and all to feed your own pathetic ego. Lacey Spears was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. In the American system, this means she will spend at least 2 decades behind bars before she has even a ghost of a chance at parole. As she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she turned to look at the cameras one last time. No, this time, no one gave her a like. The world finally saw her for what she was, a woman who traded her son's life for the illusion of sympathy in a live broadcast. The residents of the fellowship community still try not to look toward that cozy little house where a golden-haired boy once laughed. They live with the heavy burden of realization. They were the background extras in a play of death. Their sympathy, their prayers, and their likes were the very fuel that kept the fire burning in that hellish furnace. Garnett's story isn't just a criminal episode from New York. It is a mirror that we are all afraid to look into. We live in an era where suffering has been turned into content and sincerity into a marketing tool. We've grown used to trusting the image, forgetting that behind the warmest filter, an icy abyss can hide. The next time you see another story of heroic struggle in your feed, look a little closer. Perhaps behind the scenes, there is more than just the whisper of a prayer. Perhaps there is the faint, barely audible sound of salt being poured. After all, the most dangerous monsters don't hide in the woods. They sit in warm living rooms, smiling into the lens and waiting for you to hit the share button. Protect your children. And remember, true love doesn't demand a standing ovation. It is quiet, it is hidden, and it never seeks validation in a live broadcast. Like this story if you found it interesting, and subscribe to the channel. I look forward to reading your thoughts on this case in the comments below. They say that the safest place in the world is a mother's embrace. We are conditioned to believe this on a biological, almost sacred level. A woman is life. She is warmth, a lullaby in the twilight. But what happens when this instinct for creation mutates? When behind a flawless smile and perfectly styled hair, an abyss opens up, one where there is no room for love or mercy. Look at her, Lori Vallow, a former beauty queen, Miss Texas, the embodiment of the American dream. Dazzling blue eyes that seem to reflect the very sky of Idaho. She always knew how to charm, She knew how to wear the mask of the ideal mother, the caring wife, and the devout parishioner. But beneath that mask, something monstrous was festering, a perverted faith that turned her world into a battlefield between light and darkness. January 2020, sunny Hawaii, the island of Kauai, a true paradise on earth. Lori is relaxing by the pool at a luxury resort, tilting her face toward the warm rays of the sun. Beside her is her new husband, Chad Daybell, a self-proclaimed prophet and author of books about the end of the world. They look like a pair of newlyweds on an extended honeymoon. Laughter, cocktails, strolls on the beach, and not a shadow of grief on the face of the woman whose children, 7-year-old JJ and 17-year-old Tylee, disappeared without a trace months ago. While police across the country are scouring the nation for the missing angels, their mother is calmly picking out a wedding ring. She isn't crying. She isn't pleading for help. She knows the truth, hidden deep underground in an Idaho backyard, among bones and ash. To Lori, they were no longer her children. In her warped reality, they had become zombies, dark entities that stood in the way of her divine mission, and to save their souls, they had to be destroyed. Today, we will peer into the darkest depths of those still waters. We will deconstruct, piece by piece, the story of the doomsday mother, who traded her children for visions of the apocalypse and the embrace of a false prophet. This is a story of how deep faith turns into the perfect tool to justify evil, and how easily we are willing to believe a beautiful mask until the monster's snarl reveals itself behind it. Your likes and comments help promote our videos, and please subscribe to Crime Queen if you appreciate high-quality true crime videos. Thank you. She was that golden child, a vibrant blonde, always dressed to the nines, with that same dazzling American smile that makes people trust you before you even open your mouth. Her family was devout, deeply involved in the life of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Since childhood, religion wasn't just faith for Lori, it was the framework of her reality. A coordinate system where the world was clearly divided into the chosen and everyone else. In 2004, Lori participated in the Miss Texas beauty pageant. Look at this archival footage. On stage, she radiates confidence. She speaks of family, of God, of her love for children. She wins the title of Miss Congeniality. Ironic, isn't it? The woman who would later become synonymous with betrayal was, in her youth, recognized as the most charming and approachable. At that time, Lori seemed like the embodiment of vitality. She worked as a hairstylist, and her clients adored her. She was that stylist you tell everything to, from husband troubles to intimate secrets. She knew how to listen, or at the very least, she was a virtuoso at pretending to. But behind this flawless facade was a woman who changed husbands as easily as her hair color. By her 30s, she already had 3 marriages behind her. The first, straight after high school, the second, brief and hazy, and the third, with Joseph Ryan, with whom she had her eldest daughter, Tylee. It was in her relationship with Ryan that the first red flags began to appear, those very cracks in her psyche that those around her chose to ignore. Lori accused Joseph of abuse and waged endless legal battles for custody, creating the image of a warrior mother ready to do anything for her child's safety. She moved from city to city, covering her tracks, changing states, traveling thousands of miles in search of a place where she could be the leading lady of her own drama. In 2006, Charles Vallow entered her life. A successful businessman, charming, gentle, and infinitely in love. To Charles, Lori was a prize. He took in her daughter Tylee as his own, and later they adopted JJ, a young boy with autism, the son of Charles's nephew. The Vallow family looked perfect. A big house in Arizona, a spacious backyard where little JJ would run around. Lori seemed like a saint. Raising a child with special needs is hard work that requires endless patience. And Lori managed. She spent hours working with him, monitored his diet, and took him to the best doctors. Her neighbors saw her as a hero. They saw a woman who weighed only 125 pounds, but possessed a willpower capable of moving mountains for her children. But there was another side. Lori was becoming increasingly obsessed, not with motherhood, but with spiritual practices. She began to claim that she heard the voices of angels, that she was special, that she had a direct connection to the heavens. Charles, being a deeply religious man, initially supported her. He didn't see it as a threat. He thought it was just her way of coping with stress. He didn't know that his beautiful Lori had already begun to cross a line where religion turns into psychosis. She started reading books by a certain Chad Daybell, a writer from Idaho who specialized in end-times prophecies. His ideas that the world would soon be destroyed and 144,000 chosen ones would be saved fell on fertile soil. In Lori's mind, a puzzle began to take shape, one where her ordinary life, with JJ's tantrums, domestic problems, and a boring husband, was merely an annoying obstacle to her grand destiny. By 2018, Mrs. Congeniality began to change. Her gaze grew colder, her speech stranger. She spoke more and more often about how the people around her weren't exactly people, that some of them had turned dark, that their souls had been displaced by demons. It was the beginning of the end. Lori Vallow was still smiling in family photos, but a coldness had already settled inside her. That same coldness that would later allow her to look at her children's empty beds without a single tear. She didn't yet know that she would soon meet her prophet, and that this meeting would be a death sentence for everyone who loved her. At first glance, Chad is the total opposite of the vibrant Lori. Awkward, slightly overweight, with a soft voice and dull manners. He lived in the quiet town of Rexburg, Idaho, wrote low-budget eschatological novels, and worked as a part-time gravedigger at a local cemetery. But to Lori, he wasn't just a writer, he was a prophet. Their connection ignited instantly. This wasn't just an affair, it was a shared psychosis. Chad whispered to Lori exactly what she was desperate to hear, that they had been husband and wife in past lives, that they were the chosen leaders destined to head the 144,000 righteous during the second coming. "You are a goddess, Lori," he told her, and Lori believed him, because the role of a goddess suited her much better than the role of a mother to a child with autism. It was then that a terrifying word entered their vocabulary: zombies. Chad developed an entire rating system of light and dark. According to his theory, if a person became too dark, their true spirit would leave the body and a demon would take its place. They called such a being a zombie. And here lies the most chilling detail of their motivation. They believed, or convinced themselves, that killing such a body was an act of mercy. You weren't killing a person, you were simply releasing their soul by destroying the earthly shell. The first on the dark list was Lori's husband, Charles Vallow. By early 2019, Charles was terrified. He saw his wife changing before his eyes. She spent thousands of dollars on esoteric webinars, locked herself in rooms and whispered incantations to cast out demons. At one point, Lori point-blank told him, "You aren't Charles anymore. An entity named Nick lives inside you, and if you stand in my way, I will destroy you." Charles pleaded with doctors for a psychiatric evaluation. He called the police, his voice trembling with fear on the recordings. "She says I'm a zombie! She's threatening to kill me!" he screamed into the receiver. But the police saw a calm, well-groomed, smiling blonde. Lori flirted with the officers, joked, and appeared perfectly sane. Who would believe a frightened man when standing before Mrs. Congeniality? Lori's motive was dual. On one hand, religious delusion. On the other, cold, icy pragmatism. Charles had insured his life for $1 million. The death of a zombie promised not only spiritual cleansing, but a very comfortable earthly existence. In July 2019, Charles was shot dead by Lori's brother Alex Cox. Alex claimed it was self-defense. Lori, meanwhile, was calmly making breakfast for the children in the next room. She didn't even approach her husband's body when the police arrived. She simply asked when she could take the car. After Charles's death, almost no obstacles remained. But there were the children. 7-year-old JJ and 17-year-old Tylee. They required attention, they asked questions, and they interfered with Lori and Chad enjoying their divine romance. In September 2019, Lori packs her bags. She loads the children into the car and drives nearly 800 miles from warm Arizona to cold Rexburg, Idaho, closer to her prophet. She tells friends that Tylee and JJ have also turned dark. She sees not love in her own son's eyes, but the reflection of a demon. The cracks in her mind had turned into a canyon. She was no longer a mother. She was a warrior of light, preparing to bring the most horrific sacrifice to the altar of her madness. Chad was waiting for her in Rexburg, and in his backyard a place had already been prepared for those who had become extra in their new perfect world. September 8th. The last day Tylee Ryan was seen alive. A 17-year-old girl, vibrant, headstrong, who protected her younger brother like a lioness. On that day, they set off for Yellowstone National Park. In the surveillance footage detectives would later find, Tylee looks exhausted. She stands against the backdrop of the majestic geysers, huddling in her jacket. She doesn't yet know that her end is only a few hours away. They return to Rexburg late. According to phone records, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, was in his sister's apartment that night. And at 2:42 a.m., his phone was pinged on Chad Daybell's property. Imagine the scene, the silence of an Idaho farmyard, the darkness so thick you could touch it. Alex Cox, his sister's loyal hound, her angel of vengeance, is digging in the area of Chad's pet cemetery. Tylee was no longer a niece or a daughter to them. In their insane script, she was a dark spirit that had to be not just killed, but physically obliterated, so that not a single particle of the zombie remained on this earth. Tylee's body was dismembered and burned in a fire pit. Her remains, what was left of them, were packed into a plastic bucket and buried deep beneath a layer of sod. While the fire consumed his daughter's flesh, Lori was likely sleeping, or praying, or planning her new life with Chad. Not a single call to the police, not a single cry for help, only a cold, cosmic indifference. But JJ remained, a 7-year-old boy with autism who constantly asked, "Where's Tylee?" He was too loud, too alive. His energy irritated the goddess. September 22nd, JJ's last morning. He is sitting on the couch in his favorite red pajamas with Prince. He weighs only 50 pounds, a tiny, fragile child who trusted his mother more than anything in the world. That evening, Lori would tell her friends in the cult that JJ had turned into a zombie. She would describe how he climbed on cabinets and broke things, claiming a demon named Hevos had possessed him. That night, Alex Cox comes to Lori's apartment again. He takes the sleeping boy. JJ wasn't burned. He was killed with methodical cruelty. A plastic bag was placed over his head and wrapped with duct tape. His wrists and ankles were also bound with the adhesive. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't struggle. The small body in the red pajamas was wrapped in black trash bags and driven to that same spot on Chad Daybell's property. He was buried under the birch trees. Chad would later text his wife, Tammy, who was still alive, that he had shot a large raccoon and buried it in the pet cemetery. A raccoon. That is what he called a 7-year-old child. Now look into Lori's psychology during these days. Hours after her son was buried in the dirt, she goes online. She isn't looking for lawyers. She isn't looking for comfort. She orders a wedding dress and 2 malachite rings on Amazon. She picks out swimsuits for a trip to Hawaii. In her world, the children weren't dead. They were deleted from the equation, like old files from a hard drive. She acted as if they had never existed. When neighbors asked where JJ was, she would respond with a light smile, "Oh, he's at his grandma's," or "He's in Arizona." This wasn't an impulse. This wasn't a heat of passion. It was a cold, calculated plan to clear her living space for her great mission. She disposed of her children the way one disposes of old furniture before moving into a new home. And the most terrifying part, she was absolutely certain that God approved of her every step. The bloody harvest was only beginning. After all, in Chad and Lori's script, there was one more figure that had to leave the stage: Chad's legal wife, Tammy Daybell. The path to paradise on earth was paved with the bodies of those who loved them most. But before the world would learn of the children's disappearance, another domino had to fall. October 19th, 2019. Tammy Daybell, Chad's legal wife and the mother of his 5 children, suddenly dies in her bed. She was only 49 years old. She was a healthy, active woman who ran several miles a day. Chad refused an autopsy, claiming she simply went to sleep and didn't wake up. The local coroner, suspecting nothing out of the ordinary in the quiet religious town, recorded the cause of death as natural. Just 2 weeks after Tammy's funeral, Lori and Chad fly to Hawaii. Imagine the contrast. In Idaho, the ground is gripped by the first frosts, while on the beaches of Kauai, the air is warm to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. There, to the sound of the crashing surf, Lori in a white sundress and Chad in a bright shirt exchange vows of loyalty. They dance, they laugh, and they take photos at sunset. On Lori's finger is that very ring purchased on Amazon just days after her son's death. This isn't just a lack of mourning, it is a maniacal celebration. They believed their mission had begun. They were free from debt, from obligations, and from children. The alarm was raised by those Lori considered a mere nuisance on her path: Kay and Larry Woodcock, JJ's grandparents. They were used to regular FaceTime calls with their grandson, but since September, Lori had been coming up with 1,000 excuses. "He's busy. He's sleeping. We're at the zoo." Her voice on the phone was always soft, but a metallic edge had begun to creep in. By late November, the Woodcocks' patience snapped. They contacted the Rexburg police to request a welfare check. November 26, 2019. Detectives knock on Lori's door. The body cam footage from the police officers is a textbook on manipulation. Lori opens the door. She is smiling. She is flirting. She's in loungewear, looking like an ordinary woman interrupted from her chores. The detective asks, "Where is JJ?" Lori, without blinking, replies, "Oh, he's in Arizona with his friend Melanie." She says it so confidently, so matter-of-factly, that the officers initially believe her. She even complains about Kay Woodcock, calling her crazy and accusing her of trying to take her son away. She plays the role of the persecuted victim. But when the detectives leave to verify the information, the mask slips. Lori realizes time is up. That very night, she and Chad hastily pack their suitcases. They leave everything behind: the children's clothes, school backpacks, even JJ's essential medications. They simply vanish into the night, heading for the airport. When the police returned the next morning with a warrant, the apartment was empty. The air inside was heavy and stagnant. In the garage, they found abandoned bicycles. In the closets, children's clothes that still smelled of laundry detergent and home. No, the children themselves were nowhere to be found. Lori and Chad surfaced in Hawaii. They moved into a luxury condominium, ignoring calls from detectives and court orders. In January 2020, Idaho authorities issued an ultimatum. Lori Vallow was ordered to produce the children to the court within 5 days. Images of the doomsday couple flooded the global media, reporters cornering Lori and Chad by a pool in Hawaii. "Lori, where are your children?" the journalists scream. She is silent. She slowly puts on her sunglasses, adjusts her hair, and walks past with a slight smirk at the corners of her mouth. There is no fear in her eyes. Instead, there is superiority. She is certain that for the chosen ones, the laws of men do not apply. She didn't know that at that very moment, the FBI had already begun analyzing her phone data. Piece by piece, they were reconstructing Alex Cox's movements. They already knew about the strange raccoon cemetery in Chad Daybell's backyard. The net was slowly but surely tightening around the neck of the goddess while she soaked up the Hawaiian sun. FBI detectives and local police did titanic work. While Lori sat in her cell, fixing her hair before every court hearing, experts analyzed thousands of geolocation pings from her brother Alex Cox's phone. Alex was the perfect enforcer, but he wasn't a genius. His phone screamed his location. The data pointed to one single spot, the backyard of Chad Daybell's house in Salem, Idaho, a narrow strip of land between the fire pit and the pet cemetery, June 9, 2020. The day truth literally rose from the earth. The temperature that morning rose to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Dozens of cars swarmed Chad Daybell's home. Chad sat in his car on the shoulder, watching as FBI agents began to dig. He looked like a man whose world was turning to dust when the shovels hit something hard beneath the layer of sod and boards. Chad slammed on the gas and tried to escape. He was caught a few miles away. What the forensics team found made even the most seasoned investigators shudder. First, they discovered JJ's remains, the small body still in those same red pajamas, wrapped in layers of duct tape and black plastic. He was found under carefully laid stones and branches. A bit further away, in a place Chad called the Green Meadow, they found Tylee, or rather, what was left of her after attempts to destroy the body with fire and acid. This wasn't just a burial, it was an attempt to erase a human being from history. It took weeks for medical examiners to identify her remains. During all of this, in her jail cell, Lori Vallow continued to smile. The investigation also exposed a much more grounded side to the divine mission. It turned out that after the children disappeared, Lori continued to collect their Social Security benefits. She transferred the payments to her account and spent them on new clothes and life in Hawaii. Every zombie on her list brought her money. The death of her husband, Charles, insurance. The death of Tylee and JJ, government benefits. The death of Tammy Daybell, life insurance for Chad's wife totaling over $400,000. It was a perfect business model, wrapped in the packaging of religious ecstasy. Lori and Chad didn't just believe in the end of the world, they were actively monetizing its approach. Investigators found hundreds of text messages. There was no love in them. There was calculation. They discussed the pain ratings of their victims. They planned how to remove obstacles. Lori wrote to Chad about her children as if they were pesky insects. "They are almost gone," she wrote about her own son. Her arrogance was her fatal mistake. She was so convinced of her own exceptionalism that she didn't even bother to dispose of the evidence. She believed the 144,000 chosen would be saved, and the law was for dark souls. But justice, unlike her prophecies, turned out to be very real and very tangible. She sat at the defense table, occasionally whispering to her attorneys and, most chillingly, frequently smiling. That smile, while prosecutors displayed photos of her children's remains, forced jurors to look away. She didn't act like a defendant facing life in prison. She acted like a queen at a reception, forced to endure the company of unpleasant people. The prosecution was ruthless. Prosecutor Lindsay Blake, in her opening statement, delivered a line that became a headline across the globe. Money, power, and sex. That was the true religion of Lori Vallow. For weeks, the jury listened to recorded calls, saw receipts from Hawaiian hotels, and looked at horrific evidence. The most emotional moment was the testimony of her eldest son, Colby Ryan. His voice trembled as he addressed his mother across the courtroom. "Mom, you ruined everything. You killed my sister and brother." Lori looked at him, and there was not a single drop of remorse in her eyes, only cold, evaluating curiosity. Before the sentencing, Lori took the stand. It was a performance that finally confirmed her total detachment from reality. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, she told the court that she communicates with her deceased children and husband, and that they are happy in the world beyond. I know the truth. Jesus knows the truth. My children, Tylee and JJ, are happy. They are busy doing important work in heaven, she said in her soft, cooing voice. The verdict: guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of Tylee Ryan, first-degree murder of JJ Vallow, conspiracy to commit the murder of Tammy Daybell, grand theft of government funds. Judge Stephen Boyce did not hide his disgust. While handing down the sentence, he said, "You chose the most evil and destructive path possible. You justified your murders with religion, but in reality, you simply wanted to get rid of those who stood in your way." The sentence. Lori Vallow received 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. In the American judicial system, this means she will never step foot outside of a prison again. No pardons, no second chances. She walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, still slightly smiling. Chad Daybell, her prophet, later received his own sentence, the death penalty. Their apocalypse had arrived, but not at all as they had planned. It arrived in the form of the clang of prison doors, closing behind them forever. The story of Lori Vallow is more than just a chronicle of murders. It is a chilling reminder of how easily the human mind can warp reality to justify the most base desires. Lori wanted freedom. She wanted passion. She wanted money. But instead of simply walking away, she created an entire world where her children became demons and her ego became divine will. She is still there, in a cell at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center. They say she still maintains her hair and graces her cellmates with that same radiant Mrs. Congeniality smile. She has remained faithful to her mask until the very end, and therein lies the ultimate horror of this case. We look into her eyes searching for remorse, for signs of humanity, for a shadow of grief. But there is only a void. A cold, infinite void of a woman who burned her own life and the lives of her children for the illusion of her own greatness. Cherish your loved ones. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying evil doesn't hide in the shadows or back alleys. Sometimes it smiles at you from family photos, promises eternal love, and wears the mask of the ideal mother. All while a bottle of poison or a tablet with one-way tickets to a place where there is room for no one but herself clinks quietly in her purse. In Lori Vallow's world, the end of the world has already arrived. And it wasn't grand. It smelled of scorched earth, cheap plastic, and damp dirt in a backyard in Idaho. Like this story if you found it interesting, and subscribe to the channel. I look forward to reading your thoughts on this case in the comments below.